The Bard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 126, The Real Unconstrained. The small classroom of the Transfiguration Club. Perhaps because they are all of the same age, or because the professor is not present, the atmosphere here is very harmonious. By the way, are there only two of you here? I thought there would be a lot of people at first. Ino asked softly while sitting on the single sofa transformed from ice. Yes, there is no place to sit in the classroom. Everything depends on the student's abilities. If you don't have the ability, sit on the ground, or turn it into a small stool. If you have the ability, you can turn it into a bed. Of course, no one would be stupid enough to lie on the bed in front of Professor McGonagall. There were 5 people last year, but 3 of them graduated this year. Chew sat on a semicircular hanging chair, gently rocking the chair while talking, looking a little cute. Well, it seems this place is really strict, Ino sighed casually. At first, I thought there would be a Weasley prefect here. I heard he always gets perfect marks. You mean Percy? Cedric picked up the conversation, smiling. Percy's grades are good, even versatile. But Professor McGonagall values transfiguration talent, or a flash of inspiration. A perfect score in transfiguration is just the beginning, talent is the most important. Just as the few of them were chatting, footsteps were heard outside the corridor. Click. The wooden door pushed open, and Professor McGonagall entered, carrying 3 scrolls. Gentlemen and ladies. Enough of this small talk, let's begin today's discussion. The author of this argument is very familiar to you. At this point, Professor McGonagall paused deliberately, as if to keep the topic in suspense. Albus Percival, winner of the 1897 Transfiguration Today's Best Newcomer Award and president of the Hogwarts Student Council. Dumbledore's paper, Whether Spellcasting is Possible in the Animagus Form. Looking at the stunned expressions of the 3, Professor McGonagall's eyes flickered with a smile. This was exactly the effect she was aiming for. You can read the paper first. But before that, let me make one thing clear. If you want to learn Animagus, tell me. I won't stop you. Don't be like those students from a few years ago who did everything in secret, only to find out they were about to drink the potion. Ino calmly averted his gaze. Although Professor McGonagall had used a few years to confuse the audience, he knew exactly who she was referring to. If nothing unexpected happened, he would probably become one of those students Professor McGonagall mentioned in the coming years, leaving behind a legacy at Hogwarts. He shook his head slightly, then turned his attention to the old parchment scroll in his hand. As the group read, the small classroom fell into absolute silence. Time slipped by silently. About half an hour passed. Professor McGonagall clapped her hands gently. Now tell me your opinions. There is no need for theoretical basis or common sense. Be imaginative, absurd, or whatever you want. After a long while, looking at the 3 silent little wizards, Professor McGonagall could only helplessly call out their names. Ino. Let's start with you. You are the only newcomer to win the award in recent years. Set an example. Okay, then I will briefly talk about my own opinion. Without any stage fright, Ino cleared his throat and said, Professor Dumbledore's thesis is feasible in my opinion. Where does magic come from? It is not acquired, otherwise there would be no muggles in this world. So I think magic comes from blood and is an innate talent. But speaking of talent, there are so many examples of prophetic vision, Slytherin's Parseltongue, and even those born with closed brains. This makes me speculate that if wizards can still use these talents in the Animagus state. At this point, Ino deliberately slowed down his tone. If there is a prophet who saw the future while in the Animagus state, then Professor Dumbledore's argument is valid. Since innate magic can be used, why don't we integrate magic into ourselves and make it our innate talent? Just like the lightning that comes with a thunderbird's flight, and the poisonous mist that fills the air with a venomous panther's breath. If magic becomes a talent, then an animagus will no longer be ordinary, and ordinary animals will no longer be ordinary. It will suddenly become a new kind of magical creature. Ino spoke with increasing inspiration, like a river washing away a clogged riverbed. After the initial difficulty, all that remains is a torrent of words. A quarter of an hour later. With the last syllable, the small classroom fell silent again. Looking at the bewildered Chew and Cedric beside him, Ino suddenly felt that his imagination was a bit too far-fetched, and subconsciously turned to look at Professor McGonagall. Pa. 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 Professor McGonagall did not hesitate to applaud. As she clapped, she said, "That's it. Speak boldly and don't let existing knowledge constrain your thinking. The development of things and the emergence of new spells do not rely on test scores, but on the unrestrained thinking of wizards. Thank you for your recognition, Professor. Sometimes when inspiration strikes, I don't even know what I'm saying." Ino said implicitly. "Relax. This is not a classroom, it's my private club." Professor McGonagall smiled and waved her hand, but then her smile faded and she said seriously, "But I have a message for you. The first rule of adult waffling's basic rules of magic is, anyone who tampers with the deepest secrets, the source of life, the essence of the self, must be prepared to bear the most extreme and dangerous consequences." Hearing this, Ino nodded solemnly. "Professor, I will keep it in mind." "That's good," Professor McGonagall responded, and then she looked at Chu and Cedric beside her. "You two? Who's going first? We're running out of time. If we don't finish this discussion today, it'll drag on until next week." It was 9 o'clock in the evening, 1 hour before the castle's curfew. On the third floor, several figures suddenly appeared in the quiet corridor. "Great. I'll look forward to seeing you next week," Chu said, stretching lazily. "Me too. I learned a lot today," Cedric said with a look of agreement. "Sometimes, learning requires reflection and communication. I'll look forward to seeing you next time too." Ino sighed softly. At the end of the corridor, the three of them parted ways, each heading towards the common room. The difference was that Ino and Cedric headed down, while Chu slowly approached the ascending moving staircase. "Third floor, second floor, down." But he's not old Diggory, worried sick about his son. If the other party is willing to talk, for the sake of the club, he'll just listen. If the other party doesn't want to talk, there's no need to ask. Even if Cedric has been showing it all along, he just pretends not to see it. Please collect. Please recommend. Please vote. Please vote. Please vote. Please vote. The double bonus is almost over. May 7th at 12 o'clock, the double bonus will end. Chapter 127, The Magical World Acts Storytelling and Entertainment. The castle's basement corridor resembled a winding tunnel, its walls lit by flickering torches. Walking alone towards the Slytherin common room, Ino's mind was reeling from the knowledge they had just discussed. He had also come up with a way to verify Dumbledore's thesis. It wasn't that difficult, actually. He could find a device similar to the Mirror of Eris, transform it into a black swan, and see if this mind-penetrating device would freeze. If so, it would prove that the White Witch's icy heritage was unaffected by the animagus. Later, all he needed to do was find the right direction and conduct thorough research, and the black swan would become a completely new magical creature. As he walked, pondering, Ino soon arrived at the common room entrance. Pure. With a command, the wall slowly peeled back, revealing a space just wide enough for one person to pass through. 9:30 p.m. This was the busiest time for the four-house common rooms. Slytherin was no exception. After all, the little snake's arrogance was only directed at outsiders. In the corner of the common room, Draco sat in a chair, speaking passionately. Around him, gathered a number of young wizards and witches, all in their third year and below. Speaking of which, it's worth mentioning the fascinating demographic structure of Hogwarts. Years 1 and 3 form a small group, years 4-6 form another, and the graduating 7th year is yet another. These three groups within the castle rarely interact with each other. Even within the same house, there's little interaction. This is largely due to the age gap. After all, you can't expect an 11-year-old to have a conversation with a 17-year-old. Meanwhile, upon noticing Draco, Ino took the initiative and approached him. Now that he was on this Hogwarts ship, he might as well be a happy pirate. School isn't all about studying, it's also about youthful fun. Seeing Ino quietly listening nearby, Draco's spirits grew even more exuberant. He eloquently recounted his fascinating past to the young wizards. After a while, Draco seemed tired and opened a can of butterbeer, guzzling it down. "Ino, tell them one. You haven't told a proper story since the start of this year, and last year you promised to tell a snake story," Draco said with anticipation, putting down his butterbeer. Ino didn't refuse, agreeing immediately. Making up stories was a piece of cake. "Okay. Then I'll tell you one about snakes and love." He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Draco felt the noise in the common room suddenly drop by several decibels. Several young wizards even scurried off to their dormitories, looking anxious, most likely to call for help. Ino was completely oblivious to the changes in the guild room. His mind was racing, trying to come up with a story that would fit the context. A few minutes later. About 600 years ago, in a remote farm in medieval France, there lived a young man named Lion. He was a half-blood wizard, but he made a living by herding cattle. One day his cow ran madly into the deep forest in the distance. Deep in the forest, by a pond, Lion found his lost cow. He also saw two beautiful ladies bathing by the pond. He recognized them as the pure-blooded ladies of the Angus family in the forest castle. Ino used the opening of the Oriental mythological love story The Fairy and the Fairy. Of course the fairies here were replaced by witches from a pure-blooded family. In a year, they met, got to know each other, and fell in love. Leon fell head over heels for this girl named Anne. Little did he know, his entire story was being observed by Anne's jealous sister, Anna. Anna, also in love with Leon, secretly placed a curse on her to exact revenge. It's a vicious blood curse, and the one cursed will ultimately transform into a heartless viper. It started with a retelling of the story of the fairy couple, then incorporated a twist on the legend of the white snake, complete with a cliched story of two sisters falling in love at the same time, only to turn against each other due to love-hate relationship. It was a rich tapestry of elements, but as the story progressed, he lost track of what he was saying. It was clearly falling apart. Because the story was made up on the fly, without an outline or plan, it was bound to fall apart. Ino glanced around. Wow! The common room was already filled with people, seemingly unnoticed. Looking at the focused faces, he felt that Lockhart's success was no accident. Since no one had noticed, he regained his confidence and began to write the next chapter. Finally, to avoid harming innocent people, Leon had no choice but to take Anne, now transformed into Viper, away from home, secluded on a small island. Their love ultimately moved Venus, the goddess of love, who granted Anne a temporary break from the curse every Valentine's Day. As Ino finished speaking, applause erupted from the surroundings. The older Slytherin girls were especially captivated. A pure-blood girl fell in love with a half-blood wizard. Unable to reunite, yet the two remained together forever. Wasn't this the love they longed for? Ling. The sound of a galleon hitting the table. Then, a slightly hoarse voice echoed from the crowd. Your story was well told. I really enjoyed it. I understand the rules, so here's your reward. Ino looked up. He recognized the girl who spoke, Mina Burke, 7th-year Slytherin head girl, also a pure-blood from the 28th Burke family. But before he could say anything, more currency appeared on the table, nearly covering it with galleons and sickles. Wait. Listen to me. Ino held out his hand, halting the frenzied chain reaction. This story's free. I promised to tell it last semester, but I've put it off until now. So, everyone, take your money back. Meanwhile, upon hearing it was free, the little snakes also collected their money. Perhaps many had tipped after getting carried away, and now that they'd calmed down, they felt a bit regretful. After all, not all purebloods were named Malfoy. His frank refusal of a table full of money earned Ino the initial goodwill of countless people, even causing some of the senior students to look thoughtful. As the person involved, he didn't think too much about it. He simply refused the money because the story was too melodramatic, an impromptu tale, and he felt embarrassed to accept it. It was also a good thing the young pureblood wizards hadn't read any good stories, otherwise, such a cliched plot wouldn't have been met with much criticism. However, this also reinforced his belief that Lockhart's success was no accident. In those days, the wizarding world was starved of entertainment, and anyone with even a little talent, navigating this opportunity, could have easily achieved success. Meow, 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 thanks for the support. Zaya Odie finally finished coding at 7 o'clock. Chapter 128 Encounter between Magic Beans and Greenhouse. In the Slytherin dormitories, Ino gently plucked the harp resting on his lap, slowly composing a tune from memory. December was almost here, and after Christmas break, the Hogwarts Quidditch House Cup would soon begin. Time was running out. After half an hour of composing, Ino slowly put the harp down, only to be met with Draco's face, hesitant and troubled. If you have something to say, just say it. If not, just go to bed. Unlike Cedric, Draco was more willing to ask questions. I feel like you're not done with your story. What happened to Leon and Annie's child in the end? It's about that Rick. He can't live on the island forever. Draco analyzed the plot with a look of certainty. Ha ha ha. Ino couldn't help but laugh. He'd thought it was something else, but it turned out to be a sequel. But how could such an impromptu story have a sequel? But after seeing Draco's expectant eyes, he thought for a moment and decided to satisfy him. He immediately began to spin a far-fetched story. Later, Rick grew up and secretly left the island without his parents' knowledge. Because he looked so much like his father, Leon, he unknowingly met his beautiful yet vicious Aunt Anna, and a romantic relationship ensued. A minute passed. That's all? Where's the next part? Draco asked anxiously. Sorry, there's nothing more. Ino spread his hands out innocently. You. Draco was stunned. It took him a long moment to recover. He felt like he might as well not listen. At least the first part of the story was over. It wouldn't be as painful as it was now. Ha ha ha, there really is nothing more. Ino laughed smugly, but after a moment, the laughter died down. Wait until later. I'll tell you when I figure it out. Now, go to bed. Then tell me as soon as you figure it out. Draco reluctantly walked towards the bed. As if genuinely upset, he turned back halfway through and said hesitantly, Why don't you write it? I'll put you in touch with Obscurus Press. My father is good friends with their editor-in-chief. Believe me, this story will definitely outsell Lockhart's book. Hearing Draco's suggestion, Ino was also somewhat tempted. Probably no bard would refuse to publish a biography, just like the Brothers Grimm, who collected and copied stories from everywhere with the goal of publishing a complete book. That's a good suggestion, but wait until summer vacation. I'll put together some of the best stories. Hearing that he had to wait until summer vacation, Draco was instantly disappointed. He stood there muttering, Why wait until summer vacation? That story was so wonderful. Can't we just publish it as a single volume first? We can publish the other stories during the summer vacation. Why? Because of his dignity. A boy under 14 writing such a twisted and vulgar love story, how could he still have the dignity to do that? Ino was well aware of the difference. Telling a story and publishing a book were two completely different things. The former could be hearsay, while the latter was a true, signed work. Although he thought so, he couldn't bring himself to say it to Draco. Not a single volume. I've got a more exciting story for the summer. I'll give you a signed limited edition, how about that? I'll even illustrate it for you. To smooth things over, he made a generous promise. That's a deal. Upon hearing the promise, Draco beamed and made his way to his bed. The night passed in silence. Darkness faded quietly, and dawn crept across the horizon. The alarm clock rang, and Ino awoke from his deep sleep. As usual, he washed and dressed methodically. After tidying himself up, he gently opened the door to his bedroom and walked lightly out of the castle. On Sunday morning, the castle was somewhat quiet. Without the usual hustle and bustle, even the air held a hint of leisure, and the forbidden forest in the distance loomed through the morning mist. After taking a glance at the somewhat mysterious forbidden forest, Ino walked towards the greenhouse without looking back. He had no interest in exploring the forbidden forest. Perhaps he would go there openly in the future, but not in a sneaky way like now. Outside the greenhouse of the herbology class, Ino squatted outside a pile of defective flower pots and began a new round of screening. He wanted to find a few new homes for the magic beans. William Green's gift, the blessing of the goddess of harvest. Who wouldn't expect the magic beans blessed with such an aura to sprout? However, fate seemed to be reluctant to let him grow this bean. He squatted here and selected more than a dozen flower pots in a row. They were either cracked or had hidden injuries. None of them were usable. Just when he was about to use transformation magic to make an emergency flower pot, a gentle voice came from the greenhouse. Silly child, you won't be able to pick anything out here. They were just brought out yesterday, and they've already been screened. Hearing this, Ino looked up in surprise. Good morning, Professor Sprout. Pomona recognized the students before her. Despite the large Hufflepuff class, she still remembered every single one accurately, though she occasionally lost track of names. But she still remembered the students very well. He was also a lover of herbology, just like the fat boy in Gryffindor, a good kid. Come with me. The bouncy bulbs in Greenhouse 7 need soothing. When you're done, I can give you a few new pots as a reward. If you're willing to do it. Of course. It's my honor. Ino agreed without a second thought. The pots were small, but building a good relationship with Professor Sprout was crucial. Planting the magic beans later would likely require his guidance. More importantly, he wanted to learn Professor Sprout's magical ability to sense plants. Simply tapping his wand on the soil allowed him to determine a plant's needs. It was incredibly practical. Greenhouse 7. The hopsop bulb is a magical plant that resembles a hyacinth bulb, but it's incredibly active, hopping around in its pot. If not calmed down, it can make a mess of the entire greenhouse. Pushing open the greenhouse's glass door, countless hopsop bulbs appeared, as if on steroids, bouncing non-stop. They covered the pots and the ground. You. Professor Sprout hesitated. Ino Swinburne, just call me Ino, Ino added, averting the professor's embarrassment. After all, he'd noticed earlier that Professor Sprout probably had trouble remembering names. He understood, though, considering this year's Hufflepuff class had a staggering 103 first-year students. Well, Ino. Do you know how to calm them down? Professor Sprout asked. After a moment's thought, he found information about the plant and immediately replied, Professor, calm it with flame. Mature hops need flames because they like warmth and light. For immature hops, just grab them and press them into the soil. A standard answer. If this were in class, I'd definitely give you extra points. Professor Sprout said with a smile. She really liked students who paid attention in class, especially those who devoted themselves to herbology. Because of these mischievous little wizards, they even ranked her herbology third from the bottom, behind history of magic and astronomy, making it the third most useless course at Hogwarts, even worse than the cheesy divination class. Meow, 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 thanks for the support. Zaya Odie finally finished coding at 7 o'clock. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 129, Flame of Hope and Bouncing Bulbs. In greenhouse number 7, filled with hopsprut bulbs, under Professor Sprout's watchful eye, Ino unsheathed his elderberry wand. Blazing. A flame, representing hope and redemption, ignited, a fist-sized ball of flame floating at the tip of the wand. Before he could react, an amusing scene unfolded. Countless jubilant hopsprut bulbs suddenly quieted. Then, as if possessed of consciousness, these miraculous plants began to gather in an orderly fashion toward the flames without any command. It was like tadpoles searching for their mothers, or ants moving house. It was inexplicable. In a matter of moments, all the hopsprut bulbs in the greenhouse gathered at his feet. Amazing magic. Professor Sprout, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke. She first examined the floating flame, then squatted down and gently touched the hopsprut bulbs with her wand. After a moment, Professor Sprout stood up and sighed. I know, study herbal medicine diligently. I think there might be another master of herbalism in the future. This was a high compliment. You know, in the wizarding world, no matter what discipline, those who claim to be masters are respected wherever they go, and this respect isn't limited to the British Isles. Thank you for the compliment, it's a bit frightening to me. Ino, who also knew the importance of the master, said, there's no need to be frightened. Your fire spell is magical. The bubble bulbs have already changed, albeit subtly. Professor Sprout explained seriously. Besides, I suspect this isn't a unique case. This magical fire may actually be able to alter the properties of many plants, like devil's ivy, mibumi, and umbrella flower. Never mind, we'll talk about that later. Let's repot these energetic little creatures first. As he spoke, Professor Sprout crouched down and began to harvest the bubble bulbs. Seeing the professor already at work, Ino rolled up his sleeves and got to work. Half an hour later. After all the bubble bulbs had been thoroughly processed, greenhouse number 7 returned to its former tranquility. Professor, can I ask you a question? It's about that plant sensing magic I just mentioned. I was meaning to ask you last time. After much hesitation, Ino finally voiced his question. What's the big deal? This isn't medieval seclusion. Since the founding of Hogwarts, that bad habit has long been abolished, Professor Sprout explained, somewhat surprised. My duty is to teach you everything I can. If you're willing to learn, just come to me. That's great. I've wanted to learn this magic for a long time. Ino was pleased, thankful to have found such a responsible professor. But this is a spell I modified myself, so before you can learn it, you need to learn the Scarpin Apparition Charm. Follow me. With that, Professor Sprout led the way out of greenhouse number 7. The herbology office. Perhaps to better care for the magical plants in the greenhouse, Professor Sprout chose to place his office in a room not far from the greenhouse. A large desk with a matching chair, a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf, and a wooden sofa. Other than that, the room was otherwise bare. While the office was sparsely furnished, it didn't feel empty at all. Dotted with countless potted plants, it felt like a small, refreshing garden. Inside, Professor Sprout rummaged through the bookshelf and pulled out a yellow notebook. This is it. It contains my modified version of the Scarpin Apparition Charm. Take it home and study it yourself. If you encounter any problems, come and ask me. This spell isn't dangerous. Hearing this, Ino stood up and took the notebook with both hands. Thank you, Professor. I will study it diligently and protect it. Professor Sprout nodded slightly in approval. Ino, if you don't mind, you can come to greenhouse number 7 more often. I'd like to study the modified hopping bulbs. After a brief thought, Ino agreed. No problem. I'll come to the greenhouse every weekend afternoon to visit these little creatures. It was a sign of gratitude, and since this wasn't some rare treasure, there was no reason for him to refuse. After all, the wizarding world has a plethora of unauthorized spell modifications, so others will likely just believe it's a modified fire charm, which isn't a big deal. Meow, 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 thanks for the support. Zyodi finally finished coding at 7 o'clock. Chapter 130 Instant Message from the Library. After leaving the herbology greenhouse, Ino headed for the library. Sunday morning couldn't be wasted in vain. He'd take this opportunity to research information on the Scarpin Apparition Charm. In the library, Madame Pants sat quietly at her desk, reading as usual. Barely an emergency, she'd continue until noon. Facing her intense concentration, Ino didn't hesitate to greet her. He selected a few books from the spells section, found a favorite spot, and quietly began reading. Today's experience in the greenhouse had rekindled his interest in charms, even if it felt a bit like a bear trying to move corn, throwing and picking up. But there was nothing he could do. Born in an orphanage and lacking a foundation, this was all he could do. Perhaps a little clumsy and slow, but at least he wasn't making mistakes. In a corner of the library, Ino sat by the window, intently reading a 6th grade copy of Standard Spells. Even though there was someone across from him, and the library was apparently empty on Sunday mornings, and he'd carefully settled into a corner, he still encountered someone sharing his seat. But he was so focused on reading that he didn't bother looking up to see who was sitting across from him. The only good thing was that the person across from him was likely polite. After all, there had been no sound for so long. Meanwhile, on a weekend morning, Hermione went to the library to do her homework as usual. The noise from her dorm room made it impossible for her to concentrate. But upon arriving, she was captivated by a beautiful scene. The morning sun filtered through the ancient stained glass windows, casting dappled shadows across the quiet library. Near the window frame, a boy with short black hair sat quietly reading. His elegant amber eyes were focused and deep, as if he were completely immersed in a world of books. The boy's profile was gently outlined by the golden sunlight, as if coated with a faint glow. His fingertips gently turned the pages of the book, creating a subtle rustling sound that intertwined with the library's silence, creating a harmonious melody. Without hesitation, Hermione decisively walked over. Although she'd preferred to stand aside and observe a little longer, the up-close experience was clearly more captivating. Sitting quietly across from the boy, Hermione rested her chin on one hand. A brief moment of peace descended upon her. He didn't know how much time had passed. Ino finished reading his 6th year book, Standard Spells, and set it down, only to be met with Hermione's slightly dazed eyes. Seeing the dazed girl, he waved his hand in front of Hermione's face. Bang! There was a soft sound. As if startled, Hermione's arm suddenly gave way, causing her chin to hit the table lightly. Looking up, Hermione immediately glanced around, and when she saw that Madame Pants hadn't noticed, she reached out and rubbed the bump. Ino couldn't help but smile at Hermione. It was hard to believe that the heroic girl in the original story could have such a naive side. But considering they were in a library, he suppressed a smile and drew his wand from his sleeve. Whisper. After casting the silencing spell, Ino let go of his reservations and teased, "What's wrong with Miss Granger? You look a little dazed today. Like a drunken pompon." He expected another wave of backlash, but Hermione actually lowered her head in embarrassment. After all, since the second half of last year, Hermione had already gotten over her freshman year squeak. This made him curiously glance at the girl across from him. Did something happen? Or did someone bully you again? Although in the original story, no one had been able to bully Hermione since Halloween in her second year, there were always surprises. After all, stories are always one-sided. Meanwhile, Hermione's embarrassment was almost unbearable. Not only was she caught peeking, but she also performed a hilarious chin banging on the table. Most importantly, this all happened right in front of Ino, a complete impromptu performance. Her cheeks felt as if they were burning with a searing flame, the heat spreading to her toes. Therefore, upon hearing Ino's question, she could only lower her head, pretending not to hear. Meanwhile, after seeing Hermione's reaction, Ino had probably guessed the reason. It was simply because the girl was naturally sensitive to shame and felt embarrassed in front of her friends, which made her a little shy. With this thought in mind, he opened his notebook and quickly wrote a line in it, then pushed it along with a quill to Hermione. After all, shy girls usually don't speak easily. Across the table, Hermione was stunned at the sudden appearance of the notebook before her. Then, realizing what was happening, she picked up the quill and began writing in it as well. Despite the muffling magic, the two of them continued to communicate in their most primitive form, letters. It was a silent symphony, the small notebook acting as an invisible bridge, a channel for mutual communication. Time seemed to have lost its meaning here, as the small notebook flew back and forth between them under the warm autumn sun. Gradually, Hermione's reserved and shy demeanor faded, a faint smile creeping across her face. After writing down her final words and handing over her notebook, Hermione looked up expectantly. Ino picked up the notebook, surveying the elegant handwriting, then glanced at Hermione's eyes. Finally, he nodded with a hint of resignation. Time slipped by, and the sun crept to its highest point in the sky. It was noon. Rubbing his protesting stomach, Ino closed his book and headed for Madame Pance's desk. As for Hermione, she had already left half an hour ago. All he had to do now was check out the books he hadn't finished. He slowly approached the desk. Madame Pance's amused gaze greeted him. "I just saw it all. You and that Gryffindor girl writing instant letters. But I did what you just did 20 years ago." Madame Pants said with a hint of pride, like a child showing off. It was as if to say, "Look, I used to play with that new toy you bought." But before Ino could even speak, Madame Pants said with a hint of loss, "Although the librarian back then was even more ruthless than me, she even restricted the sound of quill scraping against paper. But sometimes, I really miss her." Listening to Madame Pants's slightly sad tone, Ino put down the book in his hand and consoled her. "The greatest significance of time is that it allows us to appreciate the scenery along the way, rather than letting us wallow in the past. But, in my opinion, you are quite strict. Last time, that Ravenclaw just sneezed." Before Ino could finish, Madame Pants interrupted him angrily, saying, "He sneezed? Merlin. I didn't know it, I thought it was thunder. If I don't chase him away, I'll be unworthy of this salary. Today's coding is done. Ziote plans to share some official HP knowledge every day, starting with fantastic beasts. Dwarf pig monster, XXX appearance, resembles a stunted piglet, with short legs, a long tail, and squinting black eyes. Characteristics, afraid of pure white dogs, even if the dogs are transformed by transfiguration." Chapter 131 The Gradually Growing Study Group. Time, like the Gryffindor hourglass in the Great Hall, slowly dwindled under Snape's kind help. As December approached, the atmosphere in the castle grew visibly restless, for the annual Christmas season was approaching, a holiday everyone longed for. Everyone. While summer vacation was wonderful, for the seventh-year graduates, it often represented a time of separation and sadness. But Christmas vacation was different, everyone could fully enjoy the festive joy. In the Slytherin dormitory, after cleaning the dormitory with a cleaning spell, Ino sat quietly, gazing intently at the three brand-new ceramic pots on the table. These contained the magical beans gifted by William Green. Miraculously, William had sent half a box of 163 beans, but under Scarpin's revealing spell, only 3 were truly alive. This made him ponder. 3 legendary stories were told in the tavern. 3 magic beans were fairly exchanged with William. 3 more beans were burned in the tower, and now there were 3 more beans showing signs of life. It seemed that everything in the fantasy world had a price tag. As long as the hidden price was found and the rules were applied, every world seemed to be a treasure waiting to be discovered. After a moment's thought, Ino stood up and carefully moved the 3 pots to the shelf beside his bed, to prevent them from being accidentally broken. After all, the dormitory would be bustling again soon. After another uninterrupted history of magic class this morning, Draco had already set out to call everyone to class. In the dormitory, Ino stood alone at the back of the room. Behind him, on the wall, hung a makeshift blackboard conjured by transfiguration magic. It had to be done. 23 young wizards had unexpectedly arrived today, the entire second year of Slytherin, so a formal presentation was naturally necessary. But he also understood today's unexpected situation. It was clearly a case of internal competition. His classmates had already started their to-make-up classes, but he was still chatting and bragging about playing wizard chess. It might not seem like a big deal in the short term, but it would become uncomfortable over time. After a brief moment of reflection, Ino stopped dwelling on them and turned to look at the 23 young wizards. Ahem. Good afternoon. Although we're all familiar with each other, some of you are here for the first time, so I have to emphasize the nature of this gathering. At this point, Ino turned and wrote a few words on the blackboard: study correctly, think independently. After writing, he turned around and looked at everyone again. Draco, Pansy, Daphne, Goyle. What is the purpose of studying history of magic? Is it educational? I think everyone here has pondered this question. Listening to a ghostly professor ramble on seems like a waste of time. Sometimes I even want to cast a stunning spell on my head. After this little joke, the atmosphere in the dormitory relaxed. After a moment, Ino coughed lightly, regaining everyone's attention. Why study history of magic? My answer is, history is like a sharp axe, it can split the frozen sea within us. We all yearn for thought, knowledge, to become powerful, to find peace. But before that, we must be able to think independently. Ino paused, noticing Pansy quietly raise her hand. Ms. Parkinson, please. He didn't address Pansy by name in a formal setting. I'm a little curious. Have we never been able to think independently? Pansy seemed to ask everyone's question. The young wizards present, including Goyle, all looked at her with inquiring eyes. That's a great question. Ino clapped softly, glancing at Pansy with appreciation. Pansy responded with a typical ladylike smile. What is independent thinking? Independent thinking means we can't blindly trust anyone or anything. We must critically examine others, our surroundings, the Ministry of Magic, and even the entire era. And the history of magic is what trains us to think independently. Now, everyone, turn to page 167 of Modern History. Professor Binns will be discussing a wizarding movement from half a century ago. Time flies when one is focused. The 1-hour review of History of Magic covered the major events that occurred between 1926 and 1945, as well as the shift in wizarding ideology. Okay. That's all for Professor Binns' class today. Finally, a reminder, don't forget to complete the essay assignments you've assigned. As he finished speaking, Ino lifted the transfiguration spell on the blackboard behind him. As all the young wizards filed out of the dormitory, only Pansy and Daphne remained. Of course, Draco also stayed behind, but he had already reached the door, but upon realizing what was happening, he turned back. In the dormitory. Looking at the familiar trio, Ino simply dropped his composure and slumped sideways onto his bed, leaning against the thick pillows and fluffy duvet. He half reclined. You three, all right. Not counting Draco. What outrageous things do you two have to say? Say it now, while I still have some energy. Ever since the Goblin Rebellion, he'd grown accustomed to the snake's wild rhetoric, practically to the point of exasperation. That was why he'd deliberately included some personal thoughts before today's review. Independent thinking was undoubtedly crucial for a Slytherin wizard. Ha ha ha. Look at that. It's not even halfway through the semester, and already someone's starting to dislike us. How sad. Daphne teased with a smile, covering her chest with her hand in a heartbroken gesture. Stop it. Ino rubbed his brow helplessly. He felt like he had a younger sister, out of nowhere, with this quirky girl. I'm not making a fuss. It's Pansy who wants to stay this time. I'm really ready to go. Daphne slowly walked over and sat down beside Ino's bed without any hesitation. Okay. I'm sorry, Ino said without raising his head, then slowly sat up. Unlike Daphne, who relaxed after getting to know her, Pansy always maintained basic courtesy, no matter what the situation, which made him feel uncomfortable being too casual. Pansy, Is there anything you want to discuss? As the words fell, Pansy became uncharacteristically sentimental. I know, you said independent thinking. But after thinking about it, I find that I can't see a future for wizards at all. Since modern history, since the Statute of Secrecy in 1689, the space we live in has been shrinking. At this point, Pansy seemed a little excited, and a hint of sharpness flashed in her eyes. Why we have to retreat? I don't understand. After the Statute of Secrecy was signed in 1692, Greater Manchester, Yorkshire, Derbyshire, and Hertfordshire, those wizarding communities disappeared. Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade were all that remained of the British Isles. We've been retreating, running away. But today, after what you just told me, I've been thinking independently about the wizarding movement half a century ago, and I think I've found the answer. Listening to Pansy's story, Ino suddenly felt like bolting for the exits. While her talk of independent thinking and examining everything calmed the other little snakes, it seemed to have led Pansy astray. It's like suppressing one problem only to have another pop up. No one is worrying. I'm done coding for today. Zyodi plans to share some official HP knowledge every day, starting with Fantastic Beasts. Piglet, XXX appearance, resembles a stunted piglet, with short legs, a long tail, and squint black eyes. Characteristics, afraid of pure white dogs, even those transformed by transfiguration. Chapter 132 Explaining Thinking and Possible Solutions. The atmosphere in the dormitory was somewhat heavy. Ino regretted starting this study group. They were supposed to sit together and review knowledge, but every time it felt like a secret meeting, and he always heard some shocking opinions. At the same time, he was also glad that they were reviewing in the dormitory, without any portraits on the walls. If they were in another place, even in the room of requirement, maybe Dumbledore would come and offer his support personally the next day. But now was not the time to think about this problem, because Pansy had already gone astray. And he had to bear the responsibility. Looking at the somewhat excited Pansy, he decided to take a drastic measure. Honestly, your idea actually makes sense. But you overlooked an important factor. As Ino said this, he extended his hand to motion Pansy to sit down, so that she would not remain in such a state of excitement. Do you remember the Goblin Rebellion? Why did the goblins finally give in? It's simple, they're not as powerful as the wizards. Although they initially had the upper hand, the wise goblins saw long ago that they couldn't succeed. Goblins have intelligence, but don't wizards have it? Why do we give in? Why do we compromise? Because we can't fight the entire Muggle world. During the witch hunts of the Middle Ages, if a Muggle child caused a magical rebellion, their parents would hang them. Using facts to shift attitudes, Ino now planned to use the witch hunts to enlighten Pansy. Why did the four founders establish Hogwarts? Without the Book of Admission and the Pen of Acceptance, the only fate of young wizards from Muggle families was to be given away by their families in exchange for blood-stained gold coins. In the long run, without an influx of newborns, relying on the pure-blood wizards of the British Isles to reproduce was simply a drop in the bucket. As Ino continued his story and analysis, Pansy's temper gradually calmed. Ino, thank you. I think I understand now. There's no point in doing anything when there's an imbalance of strength. Pansy sighed softly, as if she'd truly figured out the problem. But her next words sent Ino reeling. But next year, I'm planning on signing up for Muggle Studies as an elective. Can you help me review then? Seeing Pansy's unwavering determination, Ino felt helpless, but there was nothing he could do. With things now at this point, he truly had an unshirkable responsibility. Okay. We can review together next year, but just the two of us. Don't bring so many people in. That's settled. Pansy's lips curled up slightly, her smile brimming with warmth and brightness. Bang. The dorm door slammed shut. The room fell completely silent, and Ino lay back on his bed, enjoying a long, unrequited moment of relaxation. A long, quiet moment passed. Pansy's a bit silly. Draco, who had remained silent until then, suddenly uttered a comment without context. You have another outrageous idea. Ino frowned subconsciously as he lay in bed. If it were his turn again, he'd definitely join Hufflepuff, spend time with the little badgers, eat and sleep every day, and tend to the flowers when he had nothing to do. What a wonderful life. I don't have any ideas. But I know everything requires strength. Just like when I met Scarhead and Redhead before, I could only exchange insults. But ever since I put them on the brink of a duel, they've been avoiding me ever since. Draco spoke calmly, as if discussing tomorrow's weather, casual and natural. Listening to Draco's narration, Ino couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. He'd already lost a bit of his fear of the little snakes. No ideas are best. Study hard, do well on your exams, and don't let Uncle Lucius down. I will study hard. Draco nodded in agreement, but then changed the subject, adding with some anticipation, Ino, can you teach me a few more spells? Today's coding is done. Zyodi plans to share some official HP lore every day, starting with fantastic beasts. Dwarf pig monster, XXX appearance, resembling a stunted piglet, with short legs, a long tail, and squinty black eyes. Characteristics, afraid of pure white dogs, even those transformed by transfiguration. Chapter 133 Family Magic and Tower Arrangement. When Ino heard Draco's request to learn magic, his first reaction was a headache. He was now fully aware of the troublemaking abilities of his little snake. Perhaps it was because he had just finished recounting the events of 50 years ago, but the scene felt a lot like sending off the concerned female Grindelwald, only to be greeted by the silent young Tom Riddle. However, Ino felt confident about Draco. Just like the Malfoy family tradition, they were destined not to be the first to cause trouble. With this in mind, he responded to Draco's request to learn magic. Draco, go buy a copy of Practical Household Magic. It will bring you unexpected benefits. Household magic. Draco's expression was incredulous. Seeing his disbelief, Ino, even though he was lying in bed, still picked up the wand beside his pillow. Fruit splitting. A beam of white light shot out from the tip of the wand, accurately hitting the ceramic teacup on the table. There was no loud noise, just a teacup shattered into tiny, square pieces the moment the spell struck, while the lemon and honey water in it was completely spun off to the other side of the table. See? This is home magic, perfect for peeling pomegranates. Glancing at Draco, who stood stunned, Ino chuckled and lowered his curtains. I'll get some sleep. Remember to fix the teacup with a repair spell. I've had that teacup for over a year. Listening to the sounds through the curtains, Draco silently drew his wand. He didn't immediately repair the teacup, choosing instead to gently fiddle with the uniformly sized pieces. The peaceful days flowed by like a stream, unperturbed and serene. Hogwarts Astronomy Tower. Without astronomy classes, the top of the tower was the loneliest spot on the castle. But today, far from its usual solitude and tranquility, it felt a bit noisy. Listen closely, and it sounded like various instruments playing independently, the chaotic notes trying to unify. Gradually, the various sounds merged, and a new melody was born. The tune was calm yet passionate, like the reunion of old friends after years of separation, a beer, a hug, and the need for words. After about a quarter of an hour, the tower music slowly faded. Ino sat on a chair covered in ice and let out a long sigh. Controlling a single instrument was far more challenging than controlling a multitude. Although these were all meticulously crafted automatic alchemical instruments by Davies, the timing, speed, and pauses required meticulous planning. The timpani was the most challenging of all. As one of the most crucial instruments in the orchestra, its rhythm, tempo, and pitch directly influenced the overall flow of the piece. But thankfully, all was over. Now, all the instruments had successfully recorded the entire piece, like a tape recorder, only needing to press play. Standing, Ino slowly gathered up his instruments and walked to the tower's pier. At dusk, the castle's scenery unfolded before him. A full week had passed since the last History of Magic review class, and much had happened during that week. First and foremost, the History of Magic review group had ceased its activities. This wasn't just because it attracted attention, but more importantly, it stemmed from Snape's warning. He still remembered that after finishing his work with a pile of sleepy beans, Snape had calmly said before leaving, "Don't try to play any tricks on Slytherin, for we're all still alive." It was like a warning, but also like a hint. Regardless, the moment he heard those words, the fate of the History of Magic review group was sealed. After all, Snape was never one to speak without a purpose. The fact that he could say that proved that someone was paying attention. The scenery is getting more and more beautiful. I'm alone, but I'm at ease. Ino chuckled, glancing at the forbidden forest in the distance at sunset. Then, without looking back, he descended the astronomy tower. The Gryffindor common room. The bright, warm colors of the room perpetually radiated a welcoming atmosphere. In a corner of the room, Hermione gently placed the package she was holding on the table. The package was about a foot across and a full 2 inches thick, wrapped in a tightly wrapped layer of brown paper, making it appear airtight. "Harry, this is all the evidence on Lockhart. Ino asked me to give it to you," Hermione said softly, her voice low, but her expression etched with pride. "Give it to me." Harry was taken aback. He hadn't expected Ino to choose to pass it on instead of reporting it directly after finding sufficient evidence. "What else? You discovered it, so it's best for you to handle it. Besides, Ino was fair and didn't choose to take the credit for your work." Hermione's tone was filled with a hint of disappointment. Ino had magnanimously given up the opportunity to gain fame, yet Harry still looked like this. "Listen to me, mate." Ron now expressed his opinion. He reached out and patted Harry on the shoulder, saying with a pretentious air, "Ino has done a very honest job on this matter. Clearly, this is an opportunity for fame." Despite his mature tone, Ron couldn't hide the excitement in his eyes. As the least valued child of the Weasley family, he desperately wanted to be famous, to be the center of everyone's attention. And right now, exposing Lockhart was the perfect opportunity. Ron was already thinking about how he could contribute, so that he could naturally include his name in the story. Even if the Daily Prophet mentioned it in passing, it would be a great success. Meanwhile, Harry, seeing that his two friends agreed with the idea, put away the brown paper package on the table. "But who should we turn to? Professor Dumbledore?" "But he was the one who brought Lockhart here," Harry said, a little bewildered. In contrast to Harry's confusion, Ron could no longer conceal his excitement, because he had just heard Harry say "we" instead of "I." "I can write to my father. He has some connections at the ministry. More importantly, he's long disliked Lockhart. My mother's admiration for him is beyond your imagination." Ron had barely finished speaking when Hermione added, "Make a magical copy and give it to Professor McGonagall. There's no more impartial professor in all of Hogwarts." Harry nodded decisively in agreement and was about to open the package. "Are you crazy?" "Not here." Ron grabbed Harry's hand and looked around, finding no one paying attention. But his experience told him that even though they had sat in a corner as much as possible, there were at least 5 or 6 pairs of ears or eyes in the common room, silently watching. "Let's go to Hagrid's hut. Harry, remember to take that," Ron said, calmly tugging at his robes. Harry understood and stood up to get his invisibility cloak from his dorm. Ziodes sharing of fantastic beasts, the color-changing giant snail. Level, XXX. Appearance, like a giant snail, it changes color every hour, like a kaleidoscope. Habits, wherever it crawls, it leaves a trail of highly toxic poison, causing plants that come into contact with the venom to wither and burn. Chapter 134, Registering as an Animagus. The astronomy tower's spiral staircase was exquisitely designed, spiraling upwards 2 feet wide, giving anyone walking through it a sense of superiority. Leaving the tower, Ino suddenly stopped in the corridor. A few Ravenclaw girls were laughing and jokingly walking through the hallway nearby. Moonlight, like water, or perhaps the candlelight illuminating the corridor, gently cast a shadow on the face of an Oriental woman, whose features differed from the 3-dimensional features of most Hogwarts girls. She was soft and delicate, her thin lips revealing a gentle and charming smile. Ino spotted Chiu Zhang not far away, but considering Chiu was surrounded by other girls, he opted for the subtle Oriental greeting, a smile and a nod. However, Chiu didn't respond subtly. Instead, she abandoned her companions and walked over alone. "I thought you only saw me sporadically on Thursday evenings, but I didn't expect you'd greet me in the corridor too." Chiu's tone was a little complaining, but if you listen closely, you could detect a hidden meaning. "Sorry. I usually stay in the dorms and don't have much time," Ino said apologetically. To be honest, he and Chiu had a pretty pleasant time together, but as she'd said, those pleasant times were limited to the Thursday evening Transfiguration Club. Sleeping. Chiu quietly raised her chin, her dark brown eyes filled with disbelief. Chiu leaned forward slightly and whispered softly, "Did you know someone ran from the 1st floor to the 8th floor just to run into me, then walked back down as if nothing had happened? You, on the other hand, wanted to run into you, but couldn't find your person." Seeing the girl so close, Ino instinctively took a half step back. Although he'd gotten along well with this theoretical senior in the club, he wasn't keen on getting involved yet. After all, relationships in school are like bubbles in the sun, easily popped. Perhaps many things can only be understood after graduation, albeit a little late. "I was really sleeping. The rest of the time I just went to the library to read," Ino explained helplessly. A flicker of disappointment crossed Chu's eyes at that. She still had a fondness for this junior, whose looks and knowledge rivaled Cedric's. Especially since he was so cheerful in the Transfiguration Club, his humor and maturity were unmatched by others. But her previous unconscious step back, coupled with this formulaic explanation, had also made her understand a lot. All right. See you Thursday then. Chu shrugged nonchalantly, not dwelling on it. As a Ravenclaw, she knew some things couldn't be rushed, especially since there were still at least 4 years to go. Yet, see you Thursday. Watching Chu Zhang's departing back, Ino smiled and shook his head, turning back to head downstairs. Life's little moments are like that, always bringing unexpected surprises and joy. But after these moments, the main event began. He was now going to see Professor McGonagall to discuss the public registration of an emoji. He had already hatched this idea before climbing the astronomy tower. There was no point in being sneaky. Not only could he not enjoy playing in the water, but even later, when he wanted to test the magic of the Black Swan state, he had to be cautious. And what are the benefits of concealing it? It seems that there is only one, that is, it is convenient to escape from Azkaban. Well, who would think about how to escape from prison all day long? And even if he really went to Azkaban, he had already made up his mind to hide in the asylum and stay there forever. When he becomes a legendary wizard, he will come out again. The castle's moving stairs. Ino stood on the stairs, waiting for them to move slowly, but another idea suddenly emerged in his mind. Thinking of the asylum, he thought of supplies and food, and also thought of a more important question. Can living things be brought into the asylum? You know, whether it is the planted ice flowers or the transformed owl given by Professor McGonagall, in the fundamental sense, they are not real living things. If living things can be brought in, then what about wizards? If wizards can enter, then what about the fantasy world? As his thoughts flew, Ino thought a lot, and even thought of Middle-earth. Hundreds of wizards on broomsticks defended Helm's Deep, Minas Tirith battled orcs, trolls and trolls clashed, Thestrals tore at the Nazgul. Fantastic scenes flashed by one after another, and soon they arrived at Professor McGonagall's office. Just as he raised his hand to knock, the door swung open, and 3 young wizards filed out. The air suddenly became quiet. Ino. Hermione was the first to react, greeting him with surprise. What a coincidence, you're here too, Ino smiled, nodding to Harry and Ron. We're here because... Hermione paused mid-sentence, silently mouthing the name Lockhart. Well, it was wise of you to ask Professor McGonagall. Seeing the relieved expressions on the 3 faces, Ino knew that the countdown to the death of second-year defense against the dark arts professor Gerald Lockhart had truly begun. Just as Hermione was about to say something, Professor McGonagall quietly appeared at the door. Let's go back when we're done. Behave yourself for now, I'll take care of this. Professor McGonagall looked sternly at the 3 people at the door. She felt that while the young wizards of the past might have been mischievous, they weren't as outrageous as they had been in the past 2 years. A few people kept quiet, only to secretly gather evidence of a professor's crimes. When it came to their ability to stir up trouble, the difference between these 3 and the Weasley twins was like the difference between a professional Quidditch broom and a child's. We'll be leaving. Ron and Harry nodded quickly at the somewhat serious Professor McGonagall, not forgetting to tug at Hermione's sleeve. After the 3 had completely left, Professor McGonagall looked back at the door with a sense of exhaustion. She was also a worrying person. And her intuition told her that the 3's quiet demeanor wasn't a sign of their enlightenment. Having been the head of Gryffindor for so many years, she knew her students well. They were never short on courage, but they were always short on sophistication. Come on, what's the matter? There hasn't been anything like this in the castle since last year. Though she was complaining, Professor McGonagall's tone and expression didn't betray any impatience. She was pleased with her student, who combined transfiguration with Muggle philosophy. The ideas Ino presented at the club were always refreshing. In the Transfiguration office. Professor. I'm planning to register as an animagus. Without any pleasantries, Ino stated her intentions directly. It's rare you've thought it through. Professor McGonagall sighed. Although she had promised confidentiality, as a professor, she truly didn't want her student to be discovered and punished by the ministry for this. Don't worry about anything. Just wait for my news. I'll be going to the ministry soon, just for the next couple of days. Ziody's fantastic beast of the day, the chameleon giant snail. Level, XXX. Appearance: resembling a giant's nail, but changing color every hour, like a kaleidoscope. Habits: wherever they crawl, they leave a trail of highly toxic poison, causing plants that come into contact with their venom to wither and burn. Chapter 135: The End of Lockhart. It's mid-December, and temperatures in the Scottish Highlands have plummeted to below zero. Hogwarts has also experienced its first real snowfall of the school year. The entire castle seems shrouded in a pure silver veil, and the sky takes on a deep grey-blue hue, reminiscent of a Narnian winter. Countless white flakes drift gently from the sky, blanketing the castle in snow. The lawns that once stood there are now filled with greeting snowmen. Of course, anyone trying to see these charming snowmen should be wary, as they may be mischievous and possess hidden villains. They often take advantage of the moment and launch a shower of snowballs, which, as if enchanted, land silently on the heads of the young wizards. This should be a fun and amusing occasion, but today, the castle is deserted. All the young wizards gather as best they can, discussing the events of the past 2 hours. Head of the Auror Office, Gadwin Roberts, personally led a team that apprehended Professor Lockhart of Defense Against the Dark Arts while he was having lunch in the Great Hall. Also in their company were reporters from the Daily Prophet. It had been ages, it seemed like ages since anything like this had happened. Aurors stormed Hogwarts and took away a professor in office. The Slytherin common room. Even though the whole incident had occurred 2 or 3 hours earlier, it was still bustling, almost frantic. Draco entered the common room from outside, clutching a specially printed, overprinted copy of the Daily Prophet. He ignored the bustle and headed straight for his dormitories. Bang! The door slammed shut, completely silencing the clamor. "I know. Check out the latest news." Draco waved the newspaper in his hand. "Scarhead's in trouble again, and so are his Weasley henchmen. Who knows who they've contacted? The Ministry of Magic was incredibly efficient this time. Lockhart has been convicted." Conviction in 3 hours? Upon hearing this, Ino picked up the newspaper in surprise. What caught her eye were the bold, black headlines: "A shocking hoax. Lockhart's trial, Harry Potter's contribution to the incident, the connection between a famous professor and a famous student." It seemed the Daily Prophet understood its readers. These headlines alone were enough to make one want to read on. Something that could easily have been explained in one article, yet the Daily Prophet filled an entire page with details, not only describing Lockhart's crimes, but also some risque gossip, and even including testimonials from random students interviewed at the castle. As she flipped through the paper, she finally came across the serious news. Lockhart had been convicted of fraud and intentional injury and sentenced to 3 years in Azkaban. All his property was confiscated and handed over to the Ministry of Magic to be used for compensation to the injured wizards. Money is a powerful asset, and the Ministry's swift action was likely due not only to Professor McGonagall's favor but also to the renowned author's considerable savings. It was a shrewd move. With irrefutable evidence, they decisively took action to arrest and bring him to justice. As for compensation to the injured wizards, and the amount, it was all up to the Ministry to negotiate. "I won't hear any freshly pickled toad love letters on Valentine's Day." Ino sighed softly and casually tossed the newspaper on the table. Valentine's Day. Draco seemed to have caught a secret and immediately leaned his head forward, his face full of curiosity. "Are you really in love? Tell me. Don't be so curious. Shouldn't you think about how to deal with Scarhead later? Lockhart's fanatical fans are not so easy to deal with." Ino knew very well that when facing a curious little wizard, the only way to deal with him was to use topics that made him more curious, otherwise he would face endless entanglement. Zia Odie's sharing of Fantastic Beasts today, the color-changing giant snail level, XXX appearance, it looks like a giant's nail, but it changes color every hour, like a kaleidoscope. Habits: wherever they crawl, they leave a trail of highly toxic venom, and plants that come into contact with the venom will wither and burn. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 136, Once Promised, Granger Christmas Family Dinner. Just as the entire British wizarding world was abuzz with the Lockhart incident, the Christmas holidays arrived as scheduled. The 2-week break, like a powerful fever-reducing drug, brought Hogwarts into a brief cooling-off period. It also served as a soothing balm, allowing the young wizards to return home and discuss this fraught topic with their families. This year, Ino signed the leaving list as usual. Lily Street, Stone Quarter, Manchester City, London. An affluent area by English standards, above the middle class. On Christmas Eve, just as dusk fell, warm lights flared up along the streets, and through the windows, bustling figures and cheerful laughter could be seen inside. 444 Lily Street. Ino stood at the block entrance, suitcase in hand, checking the house numbers one by one. Thanks to his well-dressed appearance, he avoided questioning by patrol officers and easily entered this affluent neighborhood. 2 years ago, he would have had to wait until the dead of night to sneak in. Under cover of darkness, he quietly searched for the daily necessities that were apparently half new but had been discarded as trash. The reason he was in the once elusive Muggle-rich neighborhood today all began with a library instant message 3 weeks ago. Hermione finally wrote a Christmas invitation in her notebook, and he had somehow agreed. It was a little unbelievable now. But since he'd agreed, he had to keep his promise. He bought some butter toffees at Honeydukes as a gift and took the night bus to the address Hermione had given him. Midway down Lily Street. A typical Victorian-style building, its red brick walls covered in ivy, and the first-floor window frames and door were covered in delicate snowflake stickers. After confirming the address, Ino knocked on the door. Knock. Knock. A middle-aged woman opened the door. Her long brown hair seemed to be a mess, though neglected and held in place with a simple black hairpin, simple and practical. "Hello, who are you looking for?" In response to the middle-aged woman's question, Ino got straight to the point. "Excuse me, is this the Granger residence? I'm a classmate of Hermione's, and she invited me to the family Christmas dinner tonight. Are you Mr. Swinburne? Come on in. Hermione wrote us a long time ago." The middle-aged woman enthusiastically opened the door and introduced herself. "By the way, I'm Hermione's mother, Maya Pruitt. If you don't mind, you can call me Aunt Maya." "Yes, Aunt Maya, you can also call me Ino," Ino replied with a polite smile. After changing into slippers in the hallway, he was led to the living room. Sitting on the leather sofa, looking out at the modern room, he felt as if he were in another world. The ornate glass chandelier, the TV screen at least 23 inches, the thick and bulky VCR, and the neatly arranged boxes of videotapes. Ino. Before he even saw the person, he heard a surprised voice from the second-floor staircase. Hermione scurried down the stairs. Even as she walked, her mouth never stopped, her words blaring. "I've been waiting for you since this afternoon, afraid you'd forgotten. I almost thought you weren't coming, and I was worried you wouldn't be able to find the address, even after dark. Thank goodness. Merry Christmas, Hermione." Ino interrupted Hermione's rambling, then pulled a long-prepared gift from her suitcase. "Here's your Christmas present." "What's this?" Hermione eagerly unwrapped the gift, expressing her anticipation for it and showing courtesy. After all, opening a gift in front of someone is a sign of respect. "What a beautiful gift. It's so beautiful." Mrs. Granger, already quietly standing by the living room, exclaimed at the gift in her daughter's hands. "Mom. It's mine." Hermione clutched the crystal ball tightly, as if afraid it would be snatched away. It was a specially crafted crystal ball, encased within it an exquisite miniature Hogwarts castle. It seemed to be enchanted with constant weather, allowing it to change its internal atmosphere based on the outside weather. Night fell, and the Hogwarts in the crystal ball was also at night. "Tisk. I'm just looking, I'm not trying to steal your gift." Mrs. Granger teased with a smile as she looked at her daughter's nervous expression. Sitting on the sofa, Ino quietly watched the scene before him. He could feel the harmony and warmth in this family. It was obvious that Hermione and her mother had a very harmonious relationship. 2 hours later. In the dining room, Ino looked at the table full of delicious food, but there was no sign of the legendary dentist, Mr. Granger. However, he didn't want to ask about other people's family affairs, so he just followed Hermione and sat on a chair in the dining room. "I'm sorry. It's just the three of us tonight." As she spoke, Mrs. Granger walked in from the living room. Although her face was normal, she couldn't hide the disappointment in her eyes. "Is Dad working overtime again? Was it him who called just now?" Hearing that there were only 3 people, Hermione quickly guessed the reason. "That's right. Your Uncle George has acute pulpitis. He just called to say he won't be home tonight. It's really a case of not complaining too soon." Mrs. Granger paused mid-sentence, seeming to realize she shouldn't complain so casually in front of her daughter's classmates. She decisively changed the subject. I know, I heard Hermione say she lives in a wizarding community. Can you tell me what it's like there? Of course, Aunt Maya. Ino readily agreed to Mrs. Granger's question. Hogsmeade is the only remaining wizarding village in Britain, and the train to Hogwarts stops nearby. As Ino continued to explain, Mrs. Granger's expression grew longing. Aunt Maya, I'll be there over the Christmas holidays. If it's possible, I'd like to invite you to visit, along with Mr. Granger and Hermione, of course. As a gesture of courtesy, he also extended an invitation. Elsewhere, Mrs. Granger's eyes flickered with interest, but after a moment's reflection, she said with a hint of regret, "Forget it. The clinic's appointments are all booked until after the new year." Ino, unfazed by the refusal, thought that in the adult world, there was no such thing as leaving on a whim. For the next few days, the three of them enjoyed a sumptuous dinner and chatted freely. Time passed quickly, and an hour before midnight, Ino asked to leave. He politely declined Mrs. Granger's request to stay, said goodbye to Hermione, picked up his suitcase, and headed for the door. Accommodation wasn't a consideration. After all, Draco, Pansy, Daphne, Neville, and the others had all been booked for tomorrow, Christmas Day, the 25th. Under the deep blue night, a black swan soared over England. As the 8th recorded animagus of this century, registered by the Ministry of Magic, although, at Professor McGonagall's behest, the Ministry had kept his registration a secret, the registration was a reality. Therefore, Ino now felt no pressure at all when using this magic. And most importantly, as a special transformation spell, animagus spells could not be detected by the trace thread. Perhaps the original creators of the trace thread hadn't anticipated that a young wizard, still ungraduated, would be able to master this ceiling transfiguring magic. Chapter 137, Hogsmeade Gathering. Hogsmeade. From above, the entire village seemed ablaze with light. Especially during Christmas, not only were every shop decked out in beautiful lights, but even the streets were lit with magical candles. Soaring in midair, Ino found the coordinates of his cabin and swooped down, flying directly into the open window of the second floor. The moment he landed, he released the spell, flicked his wand, and lit the candlesticks on the table before half lying on the bed. Honestly, after experiencing the modern life of Hermione's family, returning to Hogsmeade felt like stepping back into the Middle Ages. It wasn't that magic was bad, but rather that the gap between wizards and muggles was truly vast. In every aspect, from lifestyle to ideology, it felt like two completely different worlds. Two worlds that had no intersection, no connection. The first rays of dawn's light, like fine threads, quietly wove their way through the darkness of the sky. The ancient village of Hogsmeade, too, gradually awoke under the rising sun in the east. The three broomsticks. After ordering a lamb kidney pie, Ino sat in a corner of the hall, intending to enjoy breakfast while waiting for the guests who would arrive via the Flu network. 10 minutes later, Madame Rosmerta gently placed a plate of tempting food on the table. However, instead of retreating to the bar as usual, she chose to sit across from him and teased, "I always thought this dish was reserved for middle-aged men. I didn't expect you to enjoy something so flavorful." Ino didn't immediately respond to the teasing, but instead savored the delicacy before him. This was a traditional British culinary delicacy. Lamb kidneys, fresh vegetables, and unique spices were intertwined in the pie crust, then meticulously baked in the oven. After a moment, Ino put down his cutlery with satisfaction and looked up. When judging a dish, we can't just look at its intended audience. However, your cooking skills are truly superb. Madame Rosmerta couldn't help but chuckle at this. Tisk. Don't bother. Save your sweet talk for the girls. Or maybe you don't need to, I know them too well. Despite her rambling words, a hint of pride flickered in her eyes. She knew that while her bar wasn't particularly popular, the quality of her food was never in doubt. After a moment's hesitation, Madame Rosmerta seemed to recall something. Glancing at the fireplace, she asked curiously, "Why don't you try connecting to the Flu network? I remember all the properties in Hogsmeade are connected. And the home Flu network is one way, like opening a door that only allows exits. No one can easily enter your room without your permission." Considering the boy's background, she used a more down-to-earth analogy to explain how the Flu network worked. Listening carefully, Ino sensed concern in the other person's words, which warmed his heart. He reluctantly explained, It's not that I don't want to open it. It's that I don't know how to open it. I've never lived in a house with a flu network before. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I'll open it for you later. I thought you were afraid of people breaking into your room. Madame Rosmerta said this and stood up and walked to the bar. Although it was morning, during the Christmas holidays, customers were already trickling in. After a brief chat, Ino turned his attention to the food in front of him. The lamb kidneys were roasted to tender, delicious flavor, without a trace of mutton. The Three Broomsticks Hall. A table in the corner was surrounded by several young wizards. Ino, why don't we wait for Daphne? She might be delayed again. Draco sat bored on a stool, holding a can of butterbeer. This was his third attempt at persuasion. Opposite Draco sat Pansy and Neville. Although they didn't express their feelings, they seemed to be getting a little impatient. He glanced at the clock on the wall quietly. They had agreed to meet at 9 a.m., and it was already 9:45. Okay, then we. Ino stopped talking mid-sentence as green flames began to rise from the fireplace. Sorry. I'm late because I had to take a troublemaker with me. Daphne apologized to everyone as she walked out of the fireplace. Come on. I'm not a troublemaker. If it weren't for my mother's request, how much do you think I would want to follow you? The fireplace lit up with green flames again, and this time a girl who looked 70% similar to Daphne walked out. Daphne ignored the objections, pulling the girl behind her toward her and introducing her to the crowd. This is my sister, Astoria. I'm sorry I brought her here without permission. She'll probably be at Hogwarts next year, too. As Daphne finished speaking, the girl behind her stepped forward and said gracefully, Hello. I'm sorry to have come uninvited. I'm Daphne's sister, Astoria Greengrass. Fate was truly strange, some things seemed destined. After the girl finished introducing herself, Draco was the first to stand up. Welcome. I'm Draco Malfoy, a second-year Slytherin. Upon closer inspection, Draco's move was somewhat presumptuous, as he hadn't been the one to invite them. As the true initiator, Ino, upon seeing the future couple interacting, also stood up and declared, Welcome, Miss Greengrass. Besides, there's nothing to be sorry about. This isn't a formal banquet, just a casual gathering of friends. Hogsmeade. Deep in the alley, a quiet two-story cottage finally welcomed its own moment of activity. In the first-floor living room, three girls gathered together, chatting about various topics of interest, a chuckle punctuating the occasion. Elsewhere, Draco, for the first time ever, struck up a conversation with Neville. The two seemed to be getting along, a kind of reconciliation, a sense of having finally put aside their differences. Ino sat nearby, quietly observing the harmonious scene before him, especially the reconciliation between Draco and Neville, which delighted him greatly. Seriously, Draco wasn't a bad person, merely spoiled by his parents. Not only were Draco's portrayals of conflicting opinions repeated in the original story, but after just a year and a half of interacting with him, he had already formed a certain judgment. Time slipped by unnoticed amidst the cheerful conversation. It was approaching noon. Thanks to the combined efforts of three house elves, a table of delicious food was effortlessly prepared in the dining room. Three house elves. Not only Draco, but Pansy and Daphne also brought their own. After lunch, it was tea time, and again, gift exchanging time. Ino's gift was once again a crystal ball, custom made in bulk from Davis. Even with a discount, each still cost a whopping 9 galleons. Unlike the castle Hermione had given him, Neville's ball contained a beautiful garden, while Draco's contained a fire-breathing Hungarian stork. In short, everyone's gift was different. The only one who felt a bit awkward was Astoria. She hadn't anticipated the sudden arrival of an extra person, so she hadn't prepared an extra gift. Luckily, there was still plenty of candy in her suitcase, so she found an excuse to pack some, which at least saved some slack. It's worth mentioning that Astoria seemed quite clever, too, not opening the gift at all, thus preserving both of their presents. Chapter 138, Armor Spell, Disillusionment Spell, Disapparition. At dusk, the afterglow of the setting sun gradually faded, and with it, the joy and laughter of the gathering. As Draco, Neville, and the others left one after another, the room returned to its former quiet and coldness. In the bedroom on the second floor, on the large wooden desk, a copper candlestick burned quietly, the orange flame emitting a soft glow. In front of the desk, Ino was concentrating on reading a 3-inch thick tome. The standard book of spells written by Miranda Goshawk had no prefixes, nor those ridiculous elementary, intermediate, and advanced levels. This was the complete and unabridged standard book of spells. Except for the 3 unforgivable curses that were not included according to the requirements of the Ministry of Magic, all other spells were basically covered. This book was Draco's Christmas gift. Of course, Ino preferred Lucius's arrangement. To be honest, he was still surprised when he opened the gift. For some strange reason, this unabridged version of the standard book of spells has rarely circulated since its publication, making it a veritable treasure. Even in the Hogwarts library, it's relegated to the restricted section. Therefore, once everyone left, he eagerly opened it and began reading. While magic theoretically emphasizes refinement over breadth, certain specialized spells are essential. Bent over the unfolded parchment, Ino scribbled carefully. From the hundreds of spells in the book, he carefully selected a few that were absolutely practical, including the shield charm, disillusionment charm, cloud, apparition, healing charm, and extend without a trace. While none of these spells were offensive, they held the true essence. The iconic apparition and extend without a trace charms, in particular, were arguably the most cost-effective spells. Late into the night, the candle on the table still burned quietly. As he finished transcribing the last spell, Ino slowly closed the book, then vanished from the spot, along with the books on the table. He felt uneasy about such a treasure trove, even in a suitcase, so he had no choice but to leave it in the shelter. The morning of the 5th day of vacation 282 Hogsmeade. A dilapidated, ramshackle house. Standing in front of the house, Ino unsurely opened the Daily Prophet in his hand. In the corner of the back page, a small space the size of a tofu block, an advertisement was prominently printed: Pochi Training, Fast Spellcasting Training Class, Apparition Crash Course, Stable, Reliable and Efficient. Address. He had a strange feeling of déjà vu. But since he was already there, he decided to go in and take a look. After all, other magic was easy, but apparition required supervision. If he practiced alone, he would probably die after splitting up. Knock. Knock. Ino knocked cautiously on the door, afraid to use too much force and cause the rickety door to collapse. The door's not locked. Come right in, a gruff voice echoed from the room. He pushed the door open and entered. The room wasn't very large, only about 10 square meters. A middle-aged man sat on a chair in the middle, his clothes tattered and stained with wine and dirt. Judging from his appearance, he probably wasn't from England. His rough skin and sunken eyes gave him a more Eastern European look. Welcome to Pochi Training. Speed casting classes are 3 galleons per week, and apparition classes are 5 galleons per week. Ministry of Magic certified, no cheating. Despite his clear and coherent speech, Ino could clearly tell the man was intoxicated. The slightly reddened eyes and the dampened clothes on his chest were the best evidence. I'm not drunk, don't worry. The 2 bottles of vodka were just a breakfast aperitif, the man explained, seemingly accustomed to being misunderstood. Hearing about vodka, Ino breathed a sigh of relief. After all, the people there weren't known for their alcohol tolerance. Perhaps it was due to the region or some other factor, but many people there truly drank hard liquor like water. I want to sign up for apparition training, but you just said it's Ministry of Magic certified. Hearing the business coming in, the middle-aged man hurriedly stood up and walked towards a nearby counter. His nearly 2-meter height was quite intimidating at first glance. A moment later, Ino examined a license stamped with a Ministry of Magic seal. Hearing the aura of the seal match that of his own property deed, his last remaining doubts were dispelled. While the place was a bit run down, at least it was officially certified. He was clear on his side, but the middle-aged man had hide a snag. How old are you? You can't sign up for apparition training if you're under 17. I'm 18. Faced with this emotionally challenging question, Ino didn't even think twice, blurting out the best answer. As expected, the middle-aged man was also playing dumb. 18? That's great. Pay the fee, sign the contract, and classes will begin immediately. Behind the dilapidated house was a vacant lot. After paying the 5 galleons tuition, Ino naturally began his training there. He also learned that the middle-aged man was called Pochi, a Russian wizard. He seemed to have a story, as he didn't reveal anything beyond his name. Meanwhile, Pochi slowly approached, clutching 2 large bottles of white savory essence and several signs that resembled roadblocks. Whether you know it or not, I must reiterate the 3 essential elements of apparition: clarity of purpose, determination, And composure, Pochi said, placing conspicuous roadblocks one by one on the surrounding open space. But this is a special training class, so we have a secret formula. All you need to do now is look at the open space 1 meter away and recite the spell with determination. Don't worry about anything else. Seeing someone nearby and the white savory essence already prepared, Ino didn't worry too much about his safety. After all, it was a Ministry of Magic approved institution. After a moment, he slowly caught his breath, then drew his wand, his gaze focused on the open space a meter away. Horizontal ellipsis. Apparent. Instantly, everything around him darkened, followed by pressure from all sides. It wasn't just breathlessness that made it feel as if you were being squeezed in a narrow rubber tube. He didn't know how long it took, but finally, the tube burst, and he was naturally sprayed out. As the pressure suddenly eased, snot and tears began to flow uncontrollably. This continued for a while before he slowly regained consciousness. I now believe you're 18. Okay, the lesson is over. It's less than a week, but the money won't be refunded. Pochi's gruff voice echoed again. I earned it? Just like that. Ino muttered, glancing around. With a barricade as a guide, he easily saw that his body had appeared in the open space a meter away. But the process was so simple that it made him feel unreal. What else do you want? But you've already learned it. How about I go to Zuko and buy you 2 bunches of fireworks? Don't worry, I'll pay for it. Pochi also had a helpless expression on his face at this moment. If possible, he didn't want to be like this. The training class has been running for many years, and this is the first time he has encountered such a situation. The money has just been collected, and it hasn't even warmed up yet, and he will probably ask for a few more galleons. Forget about the fireworks. Looking at Pochi's embarrassed expression, Ino smiled and shook his head. I will come here to practice for an hour every day for the next week. Is that okay with you? Of course. I'm here during the day, you can come anytime. Pochi said in a firm tone. As long as he didn't discuss the refund of tuition, everything else would be fine. Chapter 139, Practice in the Forbidden Forest, Control the Eight-Eyed Giant Spider. Hogwarts Christmas break lasted a standard 2-week period, from December 21st to January 5th. If the first day of the holiday fell on a weekend, the 15-day break would be extended to 17 days. In his second-floor room, Ino glanced at the brand new 1993 calendar on his desk. Suddenly, it was time to return to school. Unlike the annual train ride back to school, Hogwarts had no hard and fast rules for returning during the holidays. This led many pure-blood wizards to walk through their fireplaces to Hogsmeade and then back to the castle. After watering the magic beans on the windowsill again, Ino packed his bags and prepared to return to the castle. Although the holiday felt like an accelerator, he had no complaints. He had gained more than the entire previous year in just 15 days. He had mastered apparition and even cast several other spells, including the shield charm. Of course, that was just casting, both the quality and proficiency needed improvement. Especially the traceless extension charm. His most successful experiment only doubled the capacity of a coffee cup. But that's how magic works. Once you can perform it successfully, all that's needed is time and practice. January 5th, near noon at Hogwarts. Perhaps because the train arrived in the evening, the castle seemed a little deserted. On the lawn outside the castle, Ino looked around, making sure no one was around, then drew his wand and pointed it at himself. Apparition. A cool sensation rose from his head, as if someone was standing on a stool and pouring a basin of sticky coolant. Even with the blood of a white witch, he was not afraid of the cold, but the feeling still made him shiver. A moment later, as the cool feeling spread, he saw his body gradually become transparent. Transparency, not disappearance, was the effect of the disillusionment charm. It could be considered a form of optical invisibility. As long as the distance was far enough or the surroundings were dim, it would be difficult to detect. The outskirts of the Forbidden Forest. After carefully placing the suitcase on a tree branch, he waved his wand again. Armor. An invisible barrier rose. As the ceiling of single-target defense, the shield charm not only effectively blocked all physical damage but also deflected spells to a certain extent. It was so practical that it became a basic requirement for Ministry of Magic or recruitment. However, one thing was certain, the upper limit of magic was always determined by the wizard's abilities. For example, even Mad-Eye Moody's shield charm couldn't withstand a casual attack from Voldemort. Therefore, He had decided to try his hand in the Forbidden Forest this time, not only to test the shield charm but also to verify his hypothesis about the sanctuary. With a sharp one-handed sword in his right hand and his wand in his left, he slowly made his way deeper into the Forbidden Forest. The Forbidden Forest in winter seemed somewhat desolate. Instead of its usual vitality, it exuded a sense of forbidding coldness. Ino frowned, surveying his surroundings. It was a cave covered in spider webs. Of course, this wasn't surprising, as many spiders choose to hibernate and lay eggs in nests, often covered in thick spider silk. The problem was, even though he'd found the right place, he couldn't spot the real thing, the 5x Acromantula. The cave, dozens of square meters in size, wasn't even a spider in sight. Of course, there was a bottomless tunnel deep within, also covered in spider silk everywhere. But he declined to use the tunnel. This trip was for training, not excitement. Just as he was about to leave the cave and resume his search, a faint sense of danger reached him from behind. Huh? He didn't have time to react, as if struck by a speeding motorcycle, tumbling forward in the weightlessness. A piercing squeak followed. Taking advantage of this moment, he could clearly see the creature behind him. A spider the size of a full-grown horse, covered in dense black fur, its 8 pebble-sized eyes gleaming with a fierce, cruel light. It was a young spider. Seeing its size, Ino instantly understood. A fully grown Acromantula can stretch up to 15 feet wide, easily the size of a large bus. Though the giant spider before him looked terrifying, he showed no fear. The previous attack had proven that the Acromantula couldn't break the armor spell. With no further worries, he picked up his fallen one-handed sword and lunged at the Acromantula. In a cave several dozen meters deep, Ino, sword in hand, watched helplessly as the Acromantula scurried about. Despite its massive size, it was incredibly agile, especially in a cave thick with spider webs. Running up walls and over rooftops was a simple feat. After 7 or 8 minutes of fighting, he was tackled 3 times, yet he failed to inflict any damage on the spider. Aside from a lucky break that resulted in a minor forelimb adjustment, he made no other significant gains. Seeing the Acromantula still full of energy, he slowly lowered his sword. God's edge, shadowless. Without any flashing lights or shadows, the Acromantula froze in place. Then, along with the silk thread woven into the wall behind it, its massive body split in two, completely shattering. As an intelligent species, even though dead, its pebble-sized eyes were still filled with confusion and bewilderment. Hey! Don't blame me. I wanted to play a little longer, but who told you to be so agile? As he spoke, Ino crouched down and pulled out a pre-prepared glass bottle from his pocket. Having worked with Snape on numerous occasions handling medicinal herbs, he had a basic understanding of the market. For example, the Acromantula's venom before him, while expensive, it was ultimately due to its scarcity. This horse-sized spider had only collected a small half bottle of venom, a few dozen milliliters at most. With the main task complete, he cleaned up the scene while also planning to verify his second point. After more than 10 minutes of meticulous searching, Ino finally spotted the ingredient he needed in a hidden corner of the cave. A silk cocoon the size of a wash basin held a dozen quail egg-sized spider eggs and several tiny, translucent spitterlings. He gently lifted the cocoon, and with a thought, he vanished into the cave. Sanctuary. A 4-foot-wide, icy path, with a wash basin-sized silk cocoon placed in the center. Ino crouched beside the cocoon, his mind lost in thought. He had brought the items in, but the transparent spitterlings had all perished instantly. Of course, that wasn't the point. The point was that, at that moment, his mind seemed to form a vague connection, all stemming from the cocoon before him. The spitterlings weren't all dead, but the eggs were miraculously alive, forming bonds with one another. Submission, obedience, trust. The messages transmitted through his mind gave him a different feeling, as if his own miracle had once again worked its magic. This is getting more and more interesting. Adults, embryos, birth. Ino murmured, gazing at the dozens of spider eggs within the cocoon. He felt a sense of absolute control. Odi kept his promise and worked the whole day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which really drained him. Today, the sharing class is suspended. We will continue to share new magical animals tomorrow. Odi really doesn't want to move now. Chapter 142 Months, Fishing in Black Lake to Feed Spiders. The setting sun cast its last rays across the Black Lake, its golden light dancing across the shimmering surface. By the lakeside, Ino sat quietly in a custom-made small armchair, a delicate fishing rod in hand, his gaze fixed intently on the boy on the surface. Suddenly, the boy began to lurch violently, and a flicker of joy crossed his eyes. He quickly lifted the rod and yanked back, sending a silver fish slicing a graceful arc through the air. Inertia swung the foot-long fish to the shore. Although the fish was hooked, he didn't rise to remove the hook. He remained seated, watching the fish thrash on the shore. Next to the armchair, an open suitcase suddenly teemed with 20 fist-sized accordion spiders. Forming a line, they surrounded the active fish in a flash. 10 seconds later, only a single, polished fishbone remained on the ground. Ino lifted his fishing rod in his left hand and waved his wand with his right. A plump, writhing earthworm suddenly appeared on the hook. He set the transfiguration bait, cast his line, and waited. Once he was done, he snapped his fingers, and all the spiders returned to the suitcase. Only one, the largest, acromantula with flecks of blue hair, remained on the ground. With a light leap, the blue spider landed on his lap. "Go back, good boy. Come back when you're hooked," Ino murmured, reaching out to touch the spider on his lap. As soon as he finished speaking, a message of obedience echoed through his mind, and the blue spider, likewise, nimbly jumped down and headed for the suitcase in the corner. The acromantula, a species capable of speech and possessing intelligence comparable to that of humans, also has its own strict rules. The last blue spider to leave was the leader of the 20 or so acromantula. Gazing at the floating fishing float on the lake, Ino gradually fell into deep thought. More than 2 months had quietly passed since Christmas. During that time, the castle seemed to be back on track, and few people were discussing the Lockhart incident. After all, it had been so long. Furthermore, after being arrested by the Ministry of Magic and tried by the Wizengamot, Lockhart's imprisonment was a foregone conclusion. No matter how the public debated, it was a fact that could not be changed. Similarly, as time passed, the overall atmosphere in the castle became less impetuous, but also quietly more ambiguous. Valentine's Day, February 14th, was approaching. Of course, Ino cared nothing for Lockhart or Valentine's Day. What truly mattered to him was himself, or rather, his own miracle. The eggs of the sanctuary's acromantula had hatched, and he had received 23 well-behaved and obedient spitterlings. But that seemed to be the only reward. Over the past 2 months, he'd tried everything, whether it was introducing eggs from other magical creatures, eggs from common oviparous animals, or even some ordinary insect eggs, but the sanctuary hadn't reacted the way it had before. Putting aside the connection they'd previously established, even the simple sensation of these eggs was a dead silence, as if they were devoid of life. However, he had a hypothesis about this situation. If it was correct, then entering this fantasy world wouldn't just be about wandering. Perhaps he could consider other things. Time passed quickly. After several consecutive fish, the lake fell silent. For over an hour, not even a bite had been seen, not even the float had moved. It was as if the fish in the Black Lake had learned their lesson, becoming somewhat immune to the transfiguration of the earthworms. "Next time, I'll definitely find live bait," Ino muttered, undoing the transfiguration spell on his fishing gear and picking up a nearby suitcase. The entire sanctuary was blanketed in ice and snow, forcing the acromantulas into a semi-dormant state after entering. The suitcases had become their makeshift nests. Walking along the lawn outside the castle, he couldn't help but glance at the round stone house in the distance, Hagrid's hut. After confirming that the sanctuary currently housed only one species, he immediately considered Rubeus Hagrid, the hidden magizoologist within the castle. He had forcibly applied plant hybridization techniques to magical creatures. Using a manticore and a fire crab, he had forged a new species-crossing magical creature, the blasting-tailed scroot. Such an ability was truly beyond the reach of ordinary people. Mid-February. The temperature in the Scottish Highlands had gradually risen, and so too had the hearts of the young men and women within the castle. In the Gryffindor dormitories, Hermione clutched her bedsheets tightly, angrily listening to the lewd gossip from her roommates. They were truly unreserved, despite appearing to be perfectly ladylike on the outside. However, today, everyone started openly discussing Ino again, talking about how his lighter hair and deeper, more charming eyes were, how he'd radiated elegance since last year, and Hermione felt like she was about to lose it. Even after putting herself in their shoes, she felt a sense of strangeness, but that didn't mean she'd allow such public discussion. Parvati. Can you come help me?" Hermione called out to the girls in the neutral camp. Well, a 6-person girls' dormitory was split into 4 camps. Parvati Patil, the representative of the neutral camp in the dormitory, stood up upon hearing the noise and approached Hermione. Similarly, while still chatting, the conversation had quietly slowed down, and everyone seemed somewhat distracted. It was clear everyone wanted to hear what Hermione Granger, the sole independent, had to say. She usually played it safe in the dormitory. "Here I am, Hermione, do you need my help?" Parvati quickly approached Hermione's bedside. "Can you help me get the luggage off the shelf? It's too high, and it's a bit heavy inside. We need to work together," Hermione said, kicking off her slippers and standing barefoot on the bed. For the moment, she deliberately forgot about magic, levitation spells, and the like. 2 minutes later. "It's beautiful. I haven't seen it sold anywhere in Diagon Alley. Did you custom make it?" Parvati asked in amazement. Hermione's voice suddenly rose half a decibel at this. She had been waiting for this question. "Really? I don't know. It was a Christmas gift from Ino when he visited me. Maybe he bought it in Hogsmeade, since he lives there." Although she didn't turn around, Hermione could already imagine the expressions on some people's faces. She still added, "I saw it last summer. It's a beautiful 2-story house." Parvati smiled silently. After realizing what was happening, she probably realized that she was being used as a tool. She wasn't annoyed by this. Since she had chosen the neutral camp, it didn't matter if it was harmless. On the contrary, she was somewhat happy to see it happen. Because if nothing unexpected happened, the dormitory would be bustling again. Chapter 141 Valentine's Day Gift. 1993, Valentine's Day. Early that morning, after confirming he had no classes, Ino, as usual, carried his suitcase out of his dorm. He planned to have breakfast in the Great Hall before heading to Black Lake to continue fishing. While Acromanchulas shared the common trait of all spiders, their endurance to starvation, they still needed a variety of meaty foods to thrive. Similarly, he now tried to keep his suitcase with him whenever possible, even to class. After all, the lively little creatures within, though seemingly well-behaved and obedient, were in fact a 5x dangerous species. Even as young spiders, they weren't already venomous. He didn't want to follow in Hagrid's footsteps and become another expelled student 50 years from now. While he was thinking, he had already arrived at the Great Hall. Although Lockhart was missing this year, the Great Hall was still decorated, with blooming roses adorning the walls. Looking at the seasonal decorations around him, Ino chuckled as he sat down at the long Slytherin table. With a gentle tap, an English breakfast materialized. This was the norm during breakfast time. Whenever a young wizard sat down and knocked on the table, the house elves in the kitchen would deliver a standard breakfast. There was no choice, they could eat whatever the kitchen prepared. Except for Hufflepuffs, of course, since the Badgers came into the kitchen to order. Looking at the topping sandwich and pumpkin porridge before him, Ino picked up his utensils and began to savor them. But before he ate, he placed his wand on the table so it was always there for him. Today was a bit special. After all, last year, caught off guard, he'd nearly gotten into trouble. At 8 a.m., countless owls flew into the Great Hall, seemingly on schedule. Once inside, the little owls hovered in the air, their round eyes wide open, as if confirming the recipient. Once they spotted their target, they flew overhead and began the precise hurling. After a brief hovering delay, most of the owls in the Great Hall seemed to have found their target. This group split in two, one heading for the Slytherin table, the other for the Hufflepuff table. Wingardium Leviosa seeing a wave of owls flying towards the Slytherin table, Ino instantly put down his sandwich, picked up his wand from the table, and cast a levitation charm. After casting the spell, he kept his wand raised in his right hand, not lowering it immediately after using it as usual. This was a trick he'd learned in the library for advancing the levitation charm. After reciting the spell, hold the wand high and focus, and within a short period of time, he could repeatedly tap multiple objects to cast the levitation charm. Like a shooting game, after dozens of consecutive wand taps, all the packages and letters were firmly suspended in midair. Meanwhile, a 2-meter radius, intertwined devil's net suddenly appeared around the Hufflepuff table, its long tentacles firmly entangling all the packages and letters. Witnessing this scene, Ino sighed. As expected of someone so valued by Professor McGonagall, Cedric's transfiguration always carried a calm and precise demeanor. Despite the Ravenclaw and Gryffindor between them, He could still see the other's helpless expression. The two exchanged a wry smile before each leaving the Great Hall, each carrying a pile of packages. Slytherin's dormitories. Ino had just returned to the dormitories, setting down his packages, when Draco followed closely behind. Hey, 32 pieces. I was just counting them. Hearing this teasing voice, Ino said without turning back, are you so free? Then please go get Goyle in. We can't finish all these candies, and it would be a shame if they went bad. Oh. I'll go then. Draco didn't hesitate. He was now accustomed to Ino's preference for Goyle. Any extra food was always shared with Goyle. He simply couldn't understand what was so great about that clueless Goyle. Bang! As the dormitory door closed, Ino began to unwrap the packages one by one. Perhaps that's how lovers are. Aside from chocolates, there was nothing else in the packages. A 2-inch thick stack of various postcards was tucked away in an unused cabinet in the dormitory. While he didn't have the energy to read the cheesy love messages, he wasn't about to throw them away. After all, they were painstakingly written by others, so he still had to show some basic respect. Looking at the mountain of chocolates on the table, Ino decisively drew his wand. Appear. Seconds later, the candies on the table began to glow pink. 16 pieces. You really overestimate your limits. He was speechless, completely speechless. Ino now felt the urge to carry the pile to the Auror's office. While others were looking for additives in the normal chocolates, he was looking for the normal in the additives. There were less than 30 packages, but more than half had been tampered with. Did they really think that anonymous letters were off-limits? But he also knew that, in reality, no one cared. Regardless of whether the anonymous letter could be traced to the original recipient, even if the chocolate hadn't been consumed, the punishment would generally be minor, especially for Hogwarts students, whose status provided a natural layer of protection. For students at the Ministry of Magic, punishments were primarily verbal warnings. Only after graduation did the young wizards experience the true harshness of reality. Meanwhile, a small discussion was taking place in the second-year Slytherin girls' dormitory. Inside, Daphne lay sprawled on her bed, looking at Pansy with a playful expression. Are you really going to just watch like this? You won't even need the love potion I gave you. You should have heard the rumors. That muggle witch from Gryffindor. Oh wow. There's actually a Hogwarts castle in her crystal ball. Seeing Pansy unmoved, Daphne was not discouraged, and continued to say tirelessly, by the way, someone went to her house as a guest. It was the first time for Ino to go to someone else's house besides Malfoy Manor, and it was the house of a friend of the opposite sex. I don't mind, but I'm afraid some silly girls will secretly lie in bed and cry. However, before Daphne could finish her words, Pansy responded, stood up and rushed directly to the bed. Hey. What are you doing? Go find the person who provoked you. Playing aside, after the fight, Daphne asked in a serious tone, are you really not going to care? How can I care? The Imperious Curse or the love potion? Pansy rolled her eyes at Daphne speechlessly. She was so old and still so childish. I mean that Gryffindor humplet. Daphne lowered her voice quietly. Stop it. This won't work. Ino is no fool, and I don't think I'll lose to her. There's still a lot of time. Lying on Daphne's bed, Pansy stared at the ceiling quietly. After a while, she turned over, put her mouth to Daphne's ear, and lowered her voice even more. Don't forget, this is Hogwarts. Chapter 142 Quidditch Field, Classic Singing. People sometimes wonder what joyful education really means. If anyone truly is puzzled, I recommend a visit to Hogwarts, where the school truly practices a 6-month study 6-month play schedule. After Christmas break, all young wizards' classes were drastically reduced, with few classes per week. Of course, strictly speaking, this allowed ample time for review, allowing students to better prepare for their end-of-term exams. Whether or not to review depends entirely on individual initiative, but the time was certainly plentiful. As time passed, the lingering warmth of Valentine's Day faded. While the scene of Ino and Cedric receiving gifts in the Great Hall was occasionally mentioned, much like the Lockhart incident, there were no enduring topics or enduring excitement within the castle. The week after Valentine's Day, the House Quidditch Cup began. Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. Today was the first match of the school year, Ravenclaw vs. Slytherin. Before 8:30 in the morning, everyone in the castle was already flocking to the Quidditch pitch. At that moment, No one was thinking about Hogsmeade anymore. Instead, people from Hogsmeade were coming to Hogwarts, Quidditch enthusiasts who would buy tickets to watch the games. On the Quidditch pitch, Ino didn't join the stands. Instead, he stood quietly on the side of the field, broom in hand. 10 musical instruments, large and small, floated around him. The match hadn't even begun, but the Slytherins and Ravenclaws watching were already engaging in vocal competitions, and the stands were lit up with dazzling banners and slogans. Just as no one wanted to miss such a grand event, no one wanted to miss such a chance to make money. George and Fred, each with a small, foot-long box dangling from their chest, nimbly moved through the crowd, peddling their two-nut-a-bunch fireworks. "Give me 20 fireworks," a clear voice called out. Despite the clamor, George still heard the message and, having accurately located the person, quickly made his way over. "Why are you buying so many fireworks? This isn't our match." Ron looked at Hermione in confusion. 20 bundles of fireworks cost a full 40 nuts, nearly 2 sickles, a staggering sum. Wouldn't it be better to save that money? He couldn't understand. "If I were you, I'd learn to keep my mouth shut, dear little Ronnie. I'm giving you this bundle as a reward for being a good boy." George felt a little frustrated. He'd been here for a quarter of an hour and hadn't sold more than a dozen bundles. He'd finally gotten a big sale of 20 bundles, and his good brother was trying to ruin it. "I'm not buying for the competition. I know we'll be singing before the game, so I bought some fireworks to liven up the atmosphere," Hermione explained, handing George 2 sickles. "I know we'll be singing?" George asked curiously, not taking the money. "Yes. Cheerleading is a muggle sport." Hermione spoke rapidly, explaining everything about cheerleading. George left, taking away 20 nuts with him. Fireworks on sale. Buy one, get one free. A tearful sale. Really just cost price. Time slipped by 9 a.m. sharp. A figure on a broom suddenly appeared mid-air above the Quidditch pitch. Upon closer inspection, it wasn't Madame Hooch, the usual first referee. While somewhat surprised, the young wizards didn't make a scene, primarily because the figure on the pitch was stunningly beautiful. Her delicate features, her blue-black hair, and her magnificent silver dress shimmered in the sunlight. Like a magnet, she captivated everyone's attention. Floating in midair, Ino placed all the instruments and placed her wand against her throat. "Welcome everyone to the first match of the season, Ravenclaw vs. Slytherin." The amplifying spell carried the voice clearly across the pitch. "And before that, I begged Professor McGonagall, and she's allowed me to keep everyone occupied for a few minutes so I can sing praises to the upcoming match." Meanwhile, Professor McGonagall smiled with satisfaction. She had already been captivated by the song she'd heard in her office. After a few simple opening remarks in the sky, Ino waved her wand, setting all the instruments in motion. Accompanied by a passionate yet steady rhythm, "Ahoo! Grant me freedom, grant me fire. Grant me truth, lift me higher. Aiming for the championship, soaring through the skies, vindicating my name, creating glory. Woven Flag," the theme song for the future 2010 FIFA World Cup in South Africa, now blared from the Hogwarts Quidditch pitch in 1993. Magically, the passionate song resounded throughout the air. Regardless of house, race, or professor or student, everyone's emotions were lifted by the music. This is the power of classic music. After the first verse, during a lull in the rhythm, Ino flew around the pitch on his broomstick, extending his hand to signal everyone to join in the chorus. "Under the sun, let us sing with joy. Let us celebrate this beautiful competition and stay with each other until the end of the world. Time flies, and when we grow old and strong." True to the lyrics, under the sunlight, every young wizard on the field burst into song. Even those who couldn't remember the words sang along. No one laughed. At that moment, everyone cheered from the bottom of their hearts, completely immersed in the music. In the stands, bursts of fireworks ignited. Although it was daytime, each firework was faint, but when these colorful beams came together, they seemed to truly rival the sun's brilliance. Gazing at the sea of fireworks before him, Ino couldn't help but raise his wand. He cast no spells, nor chanted any incantations, but the wand seemed to hear his inner voice. Countless flames, representing hope and redemption, continuously flowed from the tip of the wand. Gradually, the flames converged in the sky, forming a vast orange-red cloud. The flames converged, obscuring the sun. In this scene reminiscent of a natural disaster, not only did no one fear, but instead, a hint of longing appeared in their smiles, as if they had seen their most cherished vision within the blazing sky. In the stands, Dumbledore smiled, a smile that held a touch of nostalgia and relief, his azure eyes now as pure as a baby's. Professor McGonagall, Snape, Professor Sprout, everyone's lips curled up unconsciously. In the Gryffindor stands, Colin clutched his treasured camera, clicking the shutter relentlessly, as if to forever capture this wonderful moment. Today, Ziote is sharing Fantastic Beasts, Swamp Diggers. Level, XXX. Characteristics, Swamp Diggers resemble a piece of wood when still, but a closer look reveals their sharp claws and teeth. Habits, they typically lurk in swamps, feeding on small and medium-sized mammals, with mandrake being their favorite food. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 143, The Daily Prophet's Fire. June in the Scottish Highlands. A warmer, shorter summer had begun. The scorching days, though long, burned like flags, fading in a blazing flame. And at night, the brief, humid moonlit nights, like a dream, shifted and transformed, stirring layers of brilliance. The last day before leaving for summer vacation. Hogwarts at dusk, illuminated by the fading glow, remained breathtakingly beautiful. Atop the astronomy tower, Ino sat at a simple drawing board, intently painting something. Approaching slowly, one could see the canvas was a vibrant, colorful depiction of Hogwarts Castle. Beside the board, crouched a spider, nearly the size of a wash basin. Despite its size, its long, pale blue fur masked the arthropod's terrifying presence, giving it a charming, adorable appearance. At first glance, it could be mistaken for a large, stuffed doll. With a final touch of color, Ino gently lowered his brush. Before he knew it, the second year of school had come to an end. In these final moments, he always wanted to leave something behind, or perhaps simply to prove his existence. "Why do you sound sad?" A cold female voice echoed from the silent tower. "It's not sadness, it's the melancholy of parting." Ino sighed softly, stood up, and walked to the edge of the tower, caressing the weathered marble walls. "You're still young, you'll understand. From now on, some people will never be able to return to this castle again, let alone the dormitory that has been their companion for 7 years. Sensing movement at his feet, Ino turned to see a giant blue acromantula dangling in midair with silk. He said with a hint of resignation, "Lena, I told you not to spin silk randomly. It'll be troublesome if someone finds you. What's the big deal? Besides, they're all afraid of you." The cold voice rang out again. Suspended in midair, the wash basin-sized acromantula unexpectedly spoke, defying common sense. A talking acromantula is undoubtedly an adult spider, just like Aragog in the original story, a behemoth nearly 5 meters in diameter. Perhaps miracles are called miracles because they cannot be explained. As for Lena, the blue acromantula that could speak. Although he was a little surprised when she first spoke, he grew accustomed to it. After all, the sanctuary itself was a miracle. However, Ino corrected her misconception. "Lena, that's not fear, that's respect." Beside the tower, the last trace of sunset faded. Hogwarts gradually fell into darkness. Ino looked down at the castle not far away. Everything that had happened in the past flashed before his eyes like a slideshow. Ever since the flames engulfed the Quidditch field 4 months ago, the attitudes of the other young wizards had quietly shifted. It wasn't as dramatic as Lena had described, but a gap had opened up between them. It was like a student meeting a professor. While not fearful, their every word and action was filled with awe. What heightened his awe was the Daily Prophet and Colin's photograph. Whenever he thought of that newspaper, Ino always felt a sense of stillness, a gust of wind surging against a tree's edge. On the front page, a wizard pointed his wand toward the sky, a backdrop of flames obscuring the sun. Colin must have had a knack for photography. The angle and lighting were perfectly captured, complemented by the soaking and developing chemicals. The entire photo, minus the sound, resembled a filtered short video. Perhaps the Daily Prophet had invested heavily, as this perfect image complemented a detailed article. From his escape from the orphanage, to 2 years of wandering, sleeping in the open air, sleeping under a Thames bridge, and making a living by setting up a fortune-telling stall outside a Muggle primary school, to his entrance to Hogwarts, His freezing Lockhart's defense against the dark arts classroom, his conjuring a 40-foot-long snake in the Quidditch practice field, his perfect marks in all his subjects in his first year, and finally his registration as the 8th recorded animagus of this century. The article laid bare his experiences in detail after detail. Yet, the wording was precise and the writing was tactful, each line exuding courtesy and respect. This turned all his dissatisfaction into frustration, because the Daily Prophet truly knew its limits. It covered everything it needed to, while leaving out things like his selling gold coins at Gringotts, buying a house in Hogsmeade, and even the address of that house. Furthermore, the article was filled with praise, describing him as inspiring, motivated, and someone who, despite his difficult upbringing, never gave up. It perfectly portrayed a character who was both tragic and perfect. The Daily Prophet's sales did indeed improve, but for a while afterward, Ino would often encounter young wizards clutching newspapers in the castle. They wanted nothing more than autographs. And they always wanted them beneath the flame photo on the front page. As he pondered his memories, Lena's cold voice echoed from the tower again. I feel a vibration. Someone's coming up. I'll go back to the suitcase first. A flash of blue light flashed in midair. Lena snapped the spider silk and landed precisely in the suitcase. Meanwhile, the moment Lena entered, a figure appeared at the top entrance of the astronomy tower. Good evening, Professor Dumbledore. I didn't expect you to be in the astronomy tower at this hour. Are you here for stargazing and divination as well? Ino greeted, adding a small joke. Good evening. Although I enjoy divination, I actually know nothing about it. Dumbledore slowly walked into the tower and saw the setup easel. A wonderful painting. It reminds me of a friend who also loved painting. Ha ha ha, thank you for the compliment. I've only just started to develop an interest in painting recently. Ino walked over to the easel and expertly unwrapped the canvas. If you like it, it's yours. After all, you've helped me so much, and I don't have anything decent to offer in return. As he spoke, he couldn't help but think of the seamlessly extended box. You know, it still serves a vital purpose. If it weren't for Dumbledore's help in casting the extension charm, the box's doubled space would have been useless. Then I'll take it. People rarely give me paintings, they always assume I like books. Dumbledore reached out to take the scroll, his eyes casually glancing at the suitcase beside him. I know. Do you need me to expand it a bit? You know, it's not big enough for some of our big friends right now. I knew I couldn't hide it from you. Ino smiled wryly, rubbing his brow. He had tried his best to avoid opening the box near portraits, but he still couldn't hide it from Dumbledore. That's natural. When you become the headmaster of Hogwarts one day, you'll discover the castle holds countless secrets, but I can't tell you now. Dumbledore smiled with a hint of pride, like a child showing off his toys. Chapter 144 Preparations for Summer Vacation. In the early morning, the sun had just risen from the eastern horizon, tinging the sky with a faint orange-red hue. The heavy and majestic castle and the rising sunlight complemented each other beautifully. The last day of the second year had quietly arrived. At 9 o'clock in the morning, all the young wizards would leave Hogwarts as agreed. Some would leave briefly, while others would never return. The Hogwarts Express. In a closed compartment. Hermione was feeling a little happy at the moment because, just before leaving school, Ino had accepted her invitation to visit during the last week of summer vacation. As for the travel plans she had made earlier, to hell with them. Although the vacation had just started, she was already wishing time would pass faster. Why does time go so slowly? Tomorrow is the last week of summer vacation. Hermione murmured unconsciously, but these shocking words struck the other three people in the compartment like lightning. What kind of poisonous spell has got you under it? It's not even the first day of holiday, and you're already looking forward to school starting early. Ron's eyes widened in disbelief. Harry and Ginny were equally baffled. How could anyone feel that summer was passing so slowly? I'm not under a poisonous spell. I just love studying. Is that okay? If I were you, I'd be thinking about how to explain this report card full of P's and A's. There's not even a single E in any of my subjects. Harry, at least, got an E. Hermione, never one to hold back when it came to Ron, retorted without hesitation. Harry looked at Hermione innocently. He was just watching the fun. Could you please not mention him? A single E on a report card wasn't exactly a good thing. But he was also thankful that Aunt Petunia didn't care about grades, and Uncle Vernon was even more indifferent. I don't have to worry about grades. Because no one has time for that this summer. We have big things to do," Ron said nonchalantly, his words brimming with pride. Although he paused mid-sentence, it still managed to pique Harry and Hermione's interest. Harry looked at Ginny with curiosity. Ron's right. My mom probably won't have time for him this year. Ginny lowered her head slightly, her voice soft and tender. We're rich. We won the jackpot, Ron said, seeing his sister about to reveal the answer. A full 700 galleons. The Daily Profits jackpot. It'll take some time to go through the paperwork, but we've already made plans. We're all going on a family trip to Egypt, and we'll visit Bill, who's working there. Hogsmeade. 2 weeks after summer vacation. Ino, wearing a pale blue ice silk gown, stood on the balcony of her cottage, her arm resting on the iron railing, quietly gazing out at the afternoon Hogsmeade. Though bathed in the summer sun, she didn't feel the heat at all, she even felt a subtle coolness. And all this was thanks to Lena's uniqueness. It seemed as if she had truly been blessed by fate. Not only did her appearance differ from that of an ordinary acromantula, but even the silk she spun was a pale blue ice silk. After discovering this, he made a special trip to Diagon Alley, paying a galleon for a custom-made ice silk gown from Madame Magic. Thinking of this, he instinctively glanced at Lena, hanging from the ceiling. In the past 2 weeks, she had grown even larger, now looking as big as a bathtub. As if sensing the gaze, Lena retreated quietly, curling up in the web. Don't look at me. I really can't vomit anymore. Sensing Lena's aggrieved mood, Ino couldn't help but smile and console her. I don't need the silk, and one piece of clothing is enough. Later. I'll take you out and show you the world. He didn't promise Lena anything, he had a feeling that it was almost time to enter a fantasy world. Stay home and watch over the house. I'll go out and buy you some goodies so you won't go hungry when you go out. With that, Ino headed straight for the fireplace downstairs. Diagon Alley. As the only commercial area in the British Isles wizarding world, its prosperity surpasses Hogsmeade by a hair's breadth. Here, you can practically buy anything you can think of. If you really can't find it, head to Nocturne Alley next door. The Leaky Cauldron. As green flames rose, Ino had just stepped out of the fireplace when a familiar, teasing voice reached his ears. Oh wow. Our great celebrity is here again. What's your drink? Old Tom's treat. A glass of freshly squeezed grass juice? Ino chuckled, sitting on a stool in front of the bar. You're always treating us. Don't wait until Hannah inherits the bar and finds it's her loss. Rather than inheriting the bar, I'd rather she succeed in her studies and work for the Ministry of Magic. As he spoke, Old Tom approached with a glass of emerald green drink. He set the glass down inside. You expect me to lose money just from a glass of grass juice? That's disrespectful of our Abbott family. Well, rich Old Tom, I underestimated you. Ino took a sip from the glass on the table, the faint aroma of grass filing his taste buds. Please prepare some more dragon meat for me soon. It'll cost about 500 galleons. As per the rules, I'll pay an extra 10%, but the quality must be guaranteed. If dragon meat isn't enough, the flesh of other magical beasts will do. Old Tom didn't respond immediately. After a moment's thought, he murmured, there really isn't enough dragon meat, but those French smuggled in a batch of rune horses. There's definitely more than enough. They must have been so overwhelmed, not only are the prices discounted, but there's no need to pre-order, they're already in stock. Nocturne Alley. Ino, carrying his suitcase, walked into a secluded, dark alley. He made no attempt to hide his presence. Thanks to the publicity in the Daily Prophet, few would dare to provoke him. After all, even dark wizards tended to have brains and read the newspapers. Before taking action, they would consider whether they could withstand the engulfing flames. As for the less intelligent dark wizards, most were training in Azkaban. Ignoring the secretive prying eyes around him, Ino walked into a shabby 3-story building without any signs. Half an hour later, when Ino came out again, he seemed to be surrounded by an indelible smell of blood. He felt helpless. He really didn't expect that these French people were so bold that they smuggled live rune horses. As a last resort, in order to get the goods earlier, he could only help to kill and get the meat. Walking on the road, feeling the strong smell of blood on his body, Ino couldn't help but frown. He probably couldn't go to the Leaky Cauldron, so he pulled out his wand helplessly. Apparition. Chapter 145. 2 different worlds, choose order. Shelter. The mist had long since dissipated at the 2 intersections of the icy path. A path paved with red maple leaves led to the dense forest of Middle-earth's Mirkwood. Next to it, another icy path, also ending in a lush forest, stretched across the road. Ino, carrying his suitcase, stood in the middle of the path. This was a new situation for him. He had two openings and two choices at once, and for a moment, he felt a sense of hesitation. Although he had a vague feeling that both worlds could be entered, not just one to be entered and the other to be closed, he was still torn about the order. The unknown forest, with its faint darkness and fleeting green figures, seemed strange. 5 minutes later, Ino collected the dice and headed straight for the red maple path in Middle-earth. Third age 2971. 30 years since the Battle of the Five Armies. Deep within the gloomy elven forest, moonlight streamed down like silver ribbons, illuminating a mature and beautiful female elf. In Middle-earth, all elves, regardless of their species, seemed to enjoy unwavering favor. Ino looked at the somewhat unfamiliar female elf beside him, finding it hard to believe this was the once follower Doris. Her long hair cascaded down like a waterfall, light and flowing. Her tall figure resembled a blooming lily, radiating an innate nobility and purity. Though Doris's eyes remained the same brilliant emerald, unlike 30 years ago, they now held her wisdom and depth, radiant and star-like. "Didn't you say you wouldn't come again?" Doris gazed at the figure before her. Perhaps for ordinary elves, 30 years seemed like yesterday. But for Doris, that experience 30 years ago was a true childhood play and frolic, something she hadn't experienced in 1,000 natural years before reaching adulthood. "I really thought I'd never come back. But fate has its twists and turns." Ino raised his head slightly, looking at his former friend. Doris had changed so much that even at nearly 1.7 meters tall, he could barely keep his eyes level with her. Meanwhile, Doris quietly observed her former friend. In 30 years, aside from a slight increase in height, she hadn't changed much at all, seemingly immortal like the elves. This revelation brought her a certain joy. After all, Middle-earth was filled with countless stories of elves and humans, and they always ended in tragedy, largely due to the difference in lifespans. Suddenly, her gaze flicked to Ino's arm. His smooth wrist was empty. "So? You lost a bracelet I gave you." Unlike her previous crisp voice, Doris's voice, now grown, was imbued with a mature charm, almost magnetic. But now, there was a hint of life in her voice. "It's not lost." Ino denied flatly, then explained, "The bracelet became a signpost. It's with its guidance that I can return." Doris whispered, "Will you leave again?" "Yes. But I'll come back." Ino didn't hide anything. He cherished this elf friend. After all, no one wanted to see them die of old age after just a few encounters. This was probably the helplessness of the immortal race. "Still, don't lie. Come with me. Your room is still here," Doris chuckled. Meanwhile, Ino was also struck by this sudden, peaceful smile. After all, Doris had been the first person he'd met since arriving in Middle-earth. For over half an hour, Doris had remained stern, looking a bit aloof. But now, her smile felt like 100 flowers blooming. The Woodland Kingdom. In the underground palace, Ino once again met the Elf King Thranduil. There was no other way. As an outsider, entering elven territory required Thranduil's approval, even though Legolas hadn't even had that right. Time seemed to have left no trace on the Elf King's face. His beautiful features, his crown woven of red maple leaves and berries, remained unchanged. "Thank you very much for your generosity before leaving. Those potions saved many soldiers. In short, the Woodland Kingdom welcomes you back, my friend." Thranduil's tone was tinged with gratitude. After all, those potions had truly saved countless elven lives. "You're welcome. I simply put them to good use. After all, war and sacrifice are things we don't want to see." Ino didn't take credit for the Elf King's gratitude. After all, Middle-earth had become a permanent part of Sanctuary, and cultivating good relations with Thranduil was a win-win. He also lamented the unexpected rewards of his initial kindness. "I've already arranged your room. Doris will take you there later. I'm afraid you still have a lot to talk about, so I'll postpone the banquet for tomorrow. Get some rest tonight." Thranduil spoke, his eyes amusement fixed on Doris. Having lived through countless epochs, there were some things he knew all too well. 3 months passed in a flash. On the outskirts of the dense forest, although the orcs of Lonely Mountain had been annihilated, Soren still lingered at Mount Doom. Therefore, this forest, infested with evil, remained as gloomy as ever. In a cobweb-covered woodland, Ino lay in a hammock woven from blue spiderwebs. Sharp, piercing sounds echoed from all around. Beside him stood Doris, dressed in military uniform, holding a short bow. Soon, the piercing sounds faded. As the tree swayed, giant acromantulas, each about 3 meters tall, emerged from the jungle. Like well-trained soldiers, they marched in unison, gradually approaching. Behind each of these giant spiders trailed a long thread of silk, ending in cocoons of varying sizes. The smaller ones were only a meter tall, while the larger ones were almost 4 or 5 meters. The acromantuli formed a line and moved methodically toward an open chest. It was a magical scene. The small chest was like a bottomless pit, and dozens of giant spiders, dragging their prey, were easily sucked in. Doris watched the scene with fascination. Even though she had seen it many times in the past 3 months, she still found it amazing. "I feel so superfluous. His Majesty Thranduil even asked me to protect you," Doris said sheepishly, lowering her head as she stroked the short bow in her hand. "How could that be? Without you, I'd definitely get lost in this vast forest." Ino sat up, jumped off the spider silk hammock, walked over to the suitcase, and expertly buckled it shut. "But there's something I need to tell you. While I still have time, I'm planning on going on a trip. I'll explore the human world, the White City of Gondor, the vast grasslands of Rohan, or the Shire, home of the hobbits. Meow, time feels so tight today, like I'm racing against time." Luckily, Xiaodi kept his promise and made it before 8:30. Chapter 146. Call me the Great Painter Ino. Atop the towering Mindaraluan mountain stands the gleaming city of Minas Tirith, the White City. Like a shimmering pearl, it lies at the confluence of the Rohan Plains and the Andron River. From above, the White City resembles a pure snowflake, resting quietly within the embrace of the mountains. Its walls soar into the clouds, their white stone gleaming majestically in the sunlight. Atop them, towering spires, each armed with a massive trebuchet, point to the heavens like swords protecting the city. At the heart of the White City lies the towering citadel, the White Tower. In the year 1900 of the Third Age, Calimitar, the 30th king of Gondor, erected the first White Tower in Minas Anor to house the Palantir. Rising to the heavens, its pristine whiteness towers above the seven-tiered city of Minas Tirith, each with its own distinct wall and entrance. But these entrances weren't in a straight line. The main gate in the main wall was located in the east, and the next gate was built in the southeast. All entrances followed this pattern, and the road into the fortress twisted and turned around the hill. Holy White City, the third outer city. Along a wide, clean street, a young man in a pale blue robe sat at an easel, painting. This should have been a peaceful and beautiful scene, but it was suddenly interrupted by a hoarse voice. "Little painter, are you really going up there to paint for the bigwigs? You'll earn a lot of money, right?" The speaker was a short, plainly dressed elderly woman who also had a stall next to the young man, selling fruits and vegetables. "Aunt Julia, I told you not to call me little painter. Call me Ino, or the amazing great painter." Putting down his brush, Ino turned and leaned back in his chair. After spending more than 2 months together, he and the old woman beside him had become familiar with each other, occasionally exchanging harmless jokes as a welcome change of pace. "Amazing. Your paintings aren't even as good as my granddaughter's. I don't know why those bigwigs keep asking you for them." The old woman shook her head and sighed, unable to comprehend how anyone would actually buy a painting at such a high price, even at a single gold coin. "You know, you really don't consider my granddaughter? She's a few years younger than you, but she's very capable. You two can settle down first and get married in a few years." "You again." "I already said no." Ino turned his head away helplessly. He knew the old woman was kind-hearted. But having lost her son at a young age, she lived on the meager profits of selling vegetables, and she had a young granddaughter to support, which was why she was always nagging. It seemed she feared her own sudden death would leave her granddaughter without anyone to care for her, so arranging a marriage for her granddaughter became a preoccupation for her, even though she was only 5 years old. Meanwhile, despite being rejected outright once again, the old woman persisted in her persuasion, saying, "What do you mean I'm here again? You're not young anymore, you have to get married. And you have the painting skills." Seeing her about to ramble on again, Ino stood up and interrupted, "I have to go. My photo session, no, my painting session is over. Goodbye, Aunt Julia." With that, she picked up her suitcase and left without a backward glance. As for the easel and chairs she'd left behind, the stall fee in White City was a gold coin per month. In a corner of White City, The old woman stood dejectedly in front of a small vegetable stall. If you don't want to hear my nagging, just say so. Why are you running around? Who paints for others without pens? Despite her complaints, she stood up, sorted the pens and paints on the easel, and packed them up under her stall. It seemed that humanity truly had an innate sense of class division. The same was true in Holy White City. The higher you went, the more beautiful the city became, and the residents were all powerful figures. On the 5th floor, the inner city. Not only were the streets wider and neater, but even potted plants and flowers lined the streets. Occasionally, citizens hurried by, their faces brimming with calm and contentment. Inside an exquisite house on the 5th floor of the inner city, so, you've thought it through and decided to spend a gold coin on a painting? You no longer think I'm a liar. Ino sat in a chair, teasingly looking across at the man in his 20s, a well-proportioned young man with blonde hair. Just sitting there exuded a resolute and courageous demeanor. Meanwhile, upon hearing Ino's teasing, Theoden felt a surge of anxiety. If he could turn back time 2 months ago, he would have stayed out of his way, certainly not mocking the man as a liar. But now that things had come to this, he could only endure his friend's teasing. Indeed, it was precisely because of the conflict 2 months ago that he and this annoying fellow had gradually become friends. My friend. I'm leaving, Theoden said, his tone somewhat downcast. Hearing this, Ino stopped teasing and asked doubtfully, is he going on a long journey? That's nothing. I often travel far, far beyond your imagination. No. I'm leaving for good, Theoden waved his hand, a little melancholy. This time, I probably won't be back. My father's guards have sent a message, saying I must return to Rohan. Rohan? Guards? Theoden. Ino muttered. Yes. Just as you think. Theoden nodded seriously and said, formally introduce you, Theoden, Crown Prince of Rohan, only son of King Seeger of Rohan and Morwen Silverlight. Hearing this string of titles, Ino was briefly stunned. Gradually recovering, he realized that a crown prince wasn't that great. After all, he wasn't a Rohan. Well, my crown prince, I always thought you just came from a powerful family. The familiar teasing echoed again, and Theoden helplessly covered his forehead. Don't do that. Otherwise, I won't ask you to paint anymore, and you'll starve to death in Minas Tirith. Alright. You're a big customer, you have the final say. Pay now, and I'll paint right away. Ino spread his hands, as if begging for gold. After a brief joke, he looked at Theoden with some curiosity. You're the Crown Prince of Rohan, why do you live in the White City of Gondor? On the top floor of Minas Tirith, beside the fountain square. Theoden stood with his arms folded beneath a withered white tree. 10 feet away from him, a wooden box on a stand stood. Come, a little to the left. You're blocking the trunk of the tree. Ino adjusted Theoden's position while finding the right focus. Click. A soft sound, and time seemed to freeze. Looking at the heroic figure in the camera, Ino switched to automatic shooting mode. Stand still. Wait for me to come over, and we'll paint a picture together as a souvenir. Chapter 147, Photographing Theoden. High-end paintings are often achieved with the simplest of methods. An hour later, after completing a personal portrait album for Theoden, Ino began to take pictures of the scenery with great interest, the White Tower housing the Crystal of True Knowledge, the Gonza's Council Chamber, and other buildings on the top floor. Without the Crown Prince of Rohan to guide him, he wouldn't even be able to reach the 6th floor of the inner city, let alone take photos. Just as he was about to capture a swift flying above the White Tower, he heard a disgruntled grumble. It's my turn. We agreed on one per person. You've already painted twice in a row. Theoden said, looking slightly frustrated. Okay. You do it. Hearing this, he decisively gave up his spot to take pictures, as the swift had already flown away in his distraction. Watching Theoden crouching over the camera with such enthusiasm, Ino was amused but also filled with emotion. This future, valiant king of Rohan had achieved considerable success. He was able to break free from the control of Saruman the White through sheer willpower, albeit with the help of Gandalf. But for a mortal to have achieved this was a remarkable feat. Furthermore, he later kept his promise. Even fresh from the battle, he resolutely led the Rohan cavalry in an all-out effort to support Gondor, a true example of what it means to lead by example and never regret even in death. But now, he was still a playful young man in his early 20s, snapping away with his camera as if it were a treasure. Seeing that Theoden hadn't let go even after the timer had clearly expired, Ino didn't bother to say anything. He pulled a butter toffee from his pocket, but as soon as he peeled off the wrapper, the candy vanished. "I'll have one. We'll pay later." Theoden snatched the candy and stuffed it into his mouth, then swiftly ran to the camera. He was speechless, but that was perfectly normal. During today's conversation, Ino also learned about Theoden's origins. To put it bluntly, it was all his ancestors' fault. Theoden's father, having fallen out with his grandfather, fled Rohan in anger, settling in Gunzer and receiving courtesy from Gunzer's then regent. Against this backdrop, in 3E 2948, 7 years after the Battle of the Five Armies, Theoden was born in the White City. True to the saying, here he was born, here he was raised, here he led his army to support Gunzer, and here he was buried. It was evening, just as dusk was breaking. Lights lit up the 7 walls of Minas Tirith, twinkling like stars, bathing the city in a soft glow. Under the veil of night, Ino made it safely back to the 3rd outer wall before the inner city locked its doors, strolling safely down the broad street. Suddenly, his pace quickened, almost jogging back to his stall. On the deserted street, a petite old woman stood quietly at her stall, holding an oil lamp. Next to her cuddled an even thinner little girl. "Aunt Julia," Ino called softly, though shouting was forbidden in the White City at night. "Brother Ino." Before the old woman could respond, the little girl beside her ran over on her short legs. Picking the little girl up, Ino also walked over to the stall. "Why don't you go home? These things are worthless, and no one cares about them. I'm not showing you things, I'm just worried you won't find your way back." The old woman raised the ancient oil lamp in her hand. "After all, you've only been here a short time. With this, you can return back then, Lily's father. Let's go home. I'll share some candy with you. I made a lot of money today." Ino interrupted the old woman without hesitation. Yes, he was staying at the old woman's house, paying 2 silver coins a month for rent, with room and board included. "Okay, candy." The little girl in her arms chimed in, making the old woman laugh too. Even as she smiled, she couldn't stop complaining, "All you do is eat. Earning money is so easy. If you don't save it, what will you have to marry Lily with?" It was night. In an old stone room on the 3rd floor of the outer city, Ino sat quietly in a chair. Across from her, an old man and a young boy, both munched on candy. The house was small, perhaps less than 10 square meters. Though sparsely furnished, it was neat and tidy, even the rough stone walls had been meticulously polished. Despite the rather Spartan furnishings, several hand-painted paintings hung on the walls. Though the colors were faded, the stories and emotions they depicted could still be felt. "Aunt Julia, I might have to leave soon." The sudden voice left the old woman stunned, not even noticing the precious candy she dropped. Lily, beside her, looked as if she was about to cry. "Come with me. Take Lily with you, and we'll go to the home of the hobbits and settle in the Shire." Seeing the old woman's mood shift, Ino quickly finished his words. "Humans aren't like flowers or trees, how can they be without feelings?" The moment he saw the guiding oil lamp today, he had made his decision. He would take these 2 grandparents and grandchildren out of Minas Tirith, out of this future war-torn land. Perhaps the old woman wouldn't see the war, but decades later, Lily would be in her prime. By then, Sauron's orc army would storm the city, and with it, nothing could survive. The Shire? Why are we leaving so suddenly? The old woman didn't immediately refuse, but instead inquired. "Because I'm a human wizard, I foresee the war that will ravage this place in the future, and so I want to take you away early." Without hiding anything, Ino unsheathed his wand, a small flame quietly burning at the tip. This magical scene elicited no gasps of astonishment, as the grandfather and grandson across from him gazed at the flames in ecstasy, seemingly witnessing the beauty of the world within. The corners of their mouths curved involuntarily. After a long pause, a sigh of relief rang out. "Lily and I will go with you. I believe in you, and they do too." The Anduin River flowed slowly west of Minas Tirith, its waters clear and shimmering. The Shire, also located west of the White City, was a place of wonder. After crossing the river, Ino waved his wand, and using transfiguration, he transformed a boulder over a man's hide into a small carriage. He then used the same method to conjure a pair of horses to pull it. "This is truly amazing!" exclaimed Lily, standing nearby. "There's something even more magical." but you can only see it when you get to Charles. Now just be good and get in the carriage. Ino ruffled the little girl's soft hair, carried her in the carriage, and then helped the old woman get on the carriage. Chapter 148 Beautiful Charles and the Last Oil Lamp. It was an early autumn morning, already a bit chilly. In the morning light, a winding gravel path quietly stretched through green fields. Sunlight filtered through the sparse clouds, dappling the ground. On either side of the road lay rolling rice paddies, their stalks drooping, as if whispering to Mother Earth. A gentle breeze rustled through the paddies, rippling golden waves. Occasionally, a tit flew by, its clear, melodious chirping adding a touch of life to the scene. At the end of the path, a simple horse-drawn carriage approached. The driver was a young man in a light blue robe. He seemed to know the way well. He leaned against the shaft, a thick tome in his hands, reading intently, unfazed by the direction of the horses. "Brother Ino, how much longer will we have to go?" A childish, questioning voice echoed from within the carriage. "Almost. Almost," Ino replied helplessly, closing his book. Middle-earth seemed incredibly vast. Though traveling with the elderly, the weak, women, and children was bound to be slow, this journey had already taken him 3 full months, and yet he still hadn't seen the Shire. While the journey was tedious, it was also incredibly rewarding. Not only had he been able to calm down and carefully read through the standard book of spells Draco had given him, but more importantly, time had flown by. 3 months in the Woodland Kingdom, nearly 3 months in the White City, and now another 3 months on the road. For nearly a year, the young wizard's passive magic had grown almost imperceptibly. Although he had no reference point, the base time was still there. He remembered Professor Flitwick saying last year that he had the magical power of a 4th-year wizard. After adding and subtracting, Ino realized he had surpassed a 7th-year graduate and possessed the magical power of an adult wizard. Even more delighted, this wasn't his limit. His body was still at the level of a 2nd-year wizard, meaning his magic power would continue to increase with time. Just by gaining experience, I guess I can become a legend. He sighed inwardly. Then, Ino turned his gaze to the distance, where a low hill came into view. That wasn't the point. The main point was the small door frame and window lattice beneath it. "Aunt Julia. Lily. We're here, in the Shire. Baggins rubbed his eyes in disbelief. If he hadn't just turned 50, he'd have thought he had cataracts. "Are you Ino?" Seeing the young man nod slightly, Baggins pounced. "Ha ha ha. My old friend. If you hadn't helped me back then, I'd have been feeding spiders in the forest. You don't know what happened to us later, do you?" At Bag End, less than 1.7 meters high, Ino sat quietly beside him, listening to Baggins's narration. It seemed that Baggins had become somewhat lonely over the years, perhaps like those who have seen real storms and feel a little out of place when returning to their small mountain village. Ino's appearance filled the void left by Baggins. The words he had kept hidden for decades could no longer be hidden. "You know, all these years, only Gandalf has visited me occasionally. I thought you'd forgot me. Today, I'm so happy." As he spoke, Baggins' expression showed a touch of sadness, yet also a hint of joy at reunion. Perhaps this was the true mixture of joy and sorrow. "Don't be sad, old friend. I'm here, and I plan to settle down here," Ino interrupted with a chuckle. "Settle down? Not leaving?" Baggins suddenly stood up from his stool and paced back and forth excitedly around the room. "I'll still go. But I'll make my home here. I'll come back every once in a while." Ino spoke, his eyes fixed on the elderly and young grandchild sitting at the dining table next to him. "Leave it to me. I'll help you," Baggins said, heading out the door, seemingly oblivious to the late night outside. Winter in the Shire is a time of joy and feasting. After the autumn work in the fields is completed, the kind-hearted hobbits gather together for singing and dancing. In short, every day was fulfilling and joyful. Not far from Baggins's Bag End, a somewhat unusual house was ablaze with lights and filled with laughter. It was unusual because it was a 2-story wooden structure built on top of a traditional hobbit treehouse. Inside, Ino and Baggins sat in chairs chatting. Lily played with several children her age, and Aunt Julia, meanwhile, was packing food into a basket. "Are you guys joining the party or not? Still playing? Still chatting?" Aunt Julia's raspy voice called out. "Come on. Don't keep us waiting." Ino was the first to stand, taking the basket of food. Today was a special day. The old year ended and the new year began. Therefore, The lively hobbits always brought food and gathered in the Shire Square for a grand dinner that lasted until dawn. Ino, who was watching, stood up, and Baggins jumped off his chair. He said with a hint of melancholy, "Gandalf probably won't come this year. Maybe next year, or the year after. He'll always come to the Shire before New Year's and light beautiful fireworks for everyone. Old friend. Gandalf isn't the only wizard." Ino chuckled, pulling out his wand from his sleeve. Middle-earth, late in the year 2971 of the Third Age. All the hobbits living in the Shire enjoyed an unforgettable New Year's Eve dinner. Brilliant and vivid fireworks, countless delicious candies, miniature ice castles, tall ice slides, and strange, yet docile and harmless, rideable animals. Late at night, Ino put the sleeping Lily to bed. The little girl had been completely wild today, having fallen asleep on the back of a small unicorn. After settling Lily down, he left the room. "Are you leaving?" Don't underestimate an old woman's intuition. Old woman Julia sat quietly in the living room. Seeing no reply from Ino, she stood up and walked towards a nearby cabinet. A moment later, an old oil lamp appeared on the table. "It's nothing valuable, but I don't have anything else to give you. Take it with you, perhaps it will light your way at night." On a small road not far from the Shire. In the pitch-black night, a lit oil lamp cast a faint glow, illuminating the small area around it. A moment later, the flame suddenly faded, and with it, the figure holding the oil lamp. After a brief moment of strangeness, everything around returned to normal. Although it was late at night, if you listen carefully, you could still hear the hobbits' laughter and chatter on the breeze. Ziody's fantastic beast today, the silent bird. Level, XX. Characteristics, a small, spotted bluebird that never calls in its entire life, only emitting a long cry at the moment before death. Use, the silent bird's feathers can be used in truth serum and recollection potions. Chapter 149 An Unexpected World. A shelter, an icy path. Ino glanced down at the oil lamp in his hand. Though he couldn't see much from here, his intuition told him it might hold some interest. He flicked the lamp switch, extinguishing the flame before placing it in his muggle-mode suitcase. After doing this, he slowly lay down on the icy path, his experiences in Middle-earth flashing through his mind. This experience was magical. It was the longest he'd ever spent in a fantasy world, a full year. It wasn't grand or epic, but he had experienced a different kind of scenery. Family, friendship, a touch of happiness in the ordinary, like a glass of light lemonade on a midsummer night. While it wasn't as colorful as a cocktail, it still had a subtle tinge of sourness and sweetness. Lying by the roadside, Ino recalled the past, so much more. Quietly reflecting, he gradually fell into deep sleep amidst the ice and snow. Meanwhile, as Ino slept, the suitcase beside him quietly opened. Lena stood on the icy path. She glanced at the sleeping figure on the snowy ground, then spun blue spider silk, which quickly spun into a thin blanket. The blanket silently landed on Ino. Once it was covered, she stretched out her 8 slender legs and silently approached the ice-blue flower. Once she was close, she extended another long leg and gently kicked at the giant python entwined around the icy flower. However, the frost python, over 40 feet long, crawled aside with remarkable obedience. After the python left, Lena lay quietly before the icy blue flower, her 8 eyes fixed on it, lost in thought. Time slipped by, minute by minute. It was impossible to tell how long it had been. Ino slowly opened his eyes. All around him was white, as it had been before he fell asleep, unchanged in the slightest. Suddenly, as if sensing something, he glanced at the icy flowers planted in the shelter, then chuckled thoughtfully. Upon waking, the first thing he did was eat. He ate 2 bars of chocolate and 3 packs of BB's every flavor beans, and after filing his stomach, Ino picked up his suitcase and headed for the other side of the path. After all, it wasn't like the free choice of the red maple leaf path in Middle-earth. The fog on the main road had dissipated, and if he didn't enter, he wouldn't be able to leave the sanctuary. A tranquil forest, surrounded by majestic, towering trees. Between the trees, vines entwined like green ribbons, tightly connecting the forest. Sunlight poured down like a golden waterfall, penetrating the dense branches and foliage. Of course, this was all from an upward perspective. Ino slowly lowered his head. Although the sun was still shining, what lay before him was a desolate scene of withered branches and broken leaves. The scattered bones of corpses cast a shroud of chaos. Armor. Without hesitation, He immediately cast the iron armor charm. With basic protection in place, he finally surveyed the forest, strewn with corpses and resembling a battlefield. After a few minutes of careful observation, he noticed a difference. These corpses were likely not human, or only a very small fraction of them were human. From the fresher bones, he discovered that these creatures were generally hideous monsters, less than a meter tall. Goblin. A name flashed through Ino's mind. This development brought a sigh of relief. After all, goblins were always a timid and cowardly species in every story. With this in mind, he chose a direction with fewer corpses, carrying his box in one hand and his wand in the other, and leisurely walked forward. 2 hours later. At a fork in the road, Ino gazed blankly at two nearly identical paths, momentarily hesitant. The forest seemed surprisingly vast. After walking for so long, and despite killing many goblins, he still saw no sign of human activity. Bang! A loud noise echoed from a distance, crisp as firecrackers. With such a conspicuous natural landmark, he immediately headed towards the sound, suitcase in hand. Bang! 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 The sounds echoed in quick succession, and Ino's expression grew serious. He considered the possibility that these weren't firecrackers, but actual gunfire. However, gunfire clearly indicated someone, and facing an unknown story, he chose to follow. After about a quarter of an hour, Ino peered through the dense vines and spotted a tall, heroic young woman standing nearby. Behind her, another girl in a red dress, her face shrouded in panic, clutched a revolver in each hand and fired continuously at a group of green-skinned goblins not far away. Despite her firearms, she was still struggling against the endless stream of goblins surging from the forest. Just as the goblins were about to approach the girl, a calm voice rang out, "God strike, shadowless." Possessing the magical powers of a full-grown wizard, Ino unleashed his full might. Dozens, hundreds of goblins were cut in half like wheat being mowed down by a giant scythe. Terrified by this sudden change, the remaining goblins fled in all directions, scattering into the woods. Equally frightened was the girl across from them, twin pistols pointed outward in a defensive stance. "Who's there?" "I'm Huttimer, Carrie's disciple." A clear voice rang out. Though Ino couldn't immediately make out the names, he suddenly felt an inexplicable cherishment for his elder wand. "I'm human. I mean no harm." Despite his confidence in the ironclad charm, he didn't want to test the bullet's power, so he responded from a distance. The girl's guard gradually relaxed after hearing the response. After all, she had never heard a goblin speak. As Ino emerged from the bushes, the girl sheathed her pistol. "Thank you for your help, powerful magician. I'm Carrie's apprentice, the sharpshooter Caitlin." At the same moment, another girl chimed in. "Thank you for your help, powerful adventurer. My name is Celia." This simple explanation resonated like thunder in Ino's mind. He finally understood why he cherished his wand when he heard Carrie's name. Similarly, distant, almost hazy memories gradually surfaced, those of his youth defending the continent of Arad alongside 8 million warriors, dungeon and fighter. One by one, each memory seemed to be unsealed. However, after a brief moment of recollection, Ino put down his suitcase and looked solemnly at the girl in the red and white dress. "Hello, Celia. Greetings to you on behalf of all the warriors who have passed away." At that moment, he wanted nothing more. He simply wanted to greet Celia properly, on behalf of his former guild and his former friends. After all, for countless days and nights, Celia had always heard her greetings, but no one had ever truly responded. At this moment, her wish had come true. "Hello, adventurer. I don't know who the warrior you're talking about is, but I received your greetings." Celia spoke briskly, without a trace of the panic she had felt when she was surrounded by goblins. Chapter 150 Irwin's Line. It was afternoon. After dispatching a large number of goblins along the way, Ino followed the two girls out of Grand Forest and arrived at a sparsely populated market. This market had another evocative name, the Elven Line. This was a defense line built by the nearby residents to defend against the goblin invasions of the forest. Unlike his memory, the Elven Line, while sparsely populated, was filled with shops and buildings, a blacksmith shop, a tavern, an inn, a tailor shop. Ino took in the surrounding scenery with curiosity, and his curiosity was also observed by Celia as part of the scenery. "Brother Ino, is this your first time at the Elven Line?" Celia asked curiously, then continued, "Celia invites you to stay at the inn. This is the inn run by my sister Caitlin and me. We're not charging you." Hearing the girl's clear voice, Ino turned and smiled. That's great, but I'll pay. Consider this my last resort. Celia's Inn was located on the west side of the Elwyn line. Judging from the map, it was roughly at the rear of the town. It was a standard medieval single room, bare except for a bed, a table, and chairs. Ino sat in a high-backed oak chair, his suitcase and wand placed on the large round table in front of him. Adventures on the continent of Arad. Gazing out the window, he gradually fell into deep thought. Unsurprisingly, this was a vast story world, even larger than any other. Because here, not only are there so many other worlds like the heavens and the demonic realms, but there's even a concept of the universe itself. In short, it's incredibly complex. But complexity isn't always a bad thing, as it often represents diversity and tolerance. A simple example is Middle-earth. Ino always felt cautious whenever he entered. It felt like visiting someone else's home. Everyone was a family, and he was the only outsider. Arad, on the other hand, was like visiting a large tavern or inn. The people there came from all corners of the world, so there was no distinction between outsiders and insiders. As long as a wizard wasn't too conspicuous, no one would pay much attention. Yes, a wizard. Even though Caitlin had misunderstood him, he had adapted to the local customs, adventuring on this continent as a wizard. Norton. Ino murmured the name softly. After confirming the story world in Grand Forest, he had a goal. Or rather, after experiencing countless story worlds, he had a clear goal for the first time. Of course, this goal wasn't precious potions and tools, nor was it powerful magic. While this world's power level was certainly a ceiling, his own magical potential for ice, snow, and fire was also immense. The principle of biting off more than one can chew applies everywhere. He truly cared about only one person, or rather, his ideal contact, Norton, head of the Huttimer Alchemists Guild. And his contact with Norton wasn't for alchemy, but for another profession, the decomposer. He still vividly memorized the conditions for the ritual magic involving time reversal, found in the 2 grimoires he'd obtained from the Grimm brothers' stories. While the ritual involved many strange objects, one, judging by its name, stood out as particularly precious, the pure sands of time. He'd almost given up on this unheard-of item until fate struck him again. A decomposer, claiming to be able to decompose anything. Whether it was a time-turner from the magical world or any other time-related item, he threw everything into the decomposer, uncertain whether anything useful would emerge. But there was always a way to try his luck. Time slowly passed, and night gradually enveloped the entire Elwyn line. Taking advantage of dusk, countless adventurers emerged from the Grand Forest to the east. After all, no one would choose to fight goblins in a forest at night. As the last ray of light faded from the horizon, the heavy steel gates of the Elwyn line closed, creating a safe environment for the adventurers to rest for the night. Blazing. Ino waved his wand, lighting the oil lamp in the room, or rather, the one he carried with him. After all, the lamps in Celia's Inn were quite simple, a small coarse porcelain plate and a piece of cotton thread. When lit, the flame was only the size of a soybean, perhaps just a showpiece. Knock. Knock. A rhythmic knock sounded at the door. Come in. Ino waved his wand, opening the door. Sorry to bother you. But Celia said you hadn't come down for dinner yet, so I took the initiative to bring some up. The female gunner Caitlin entered the room, carrying a portion of food. Her tone was respectful, not disrespectful of her age or appearance. Having grown up in Huttimer and trained in firearms under her teacher, Kelly, she'd seen the world and was well aware that some magicians possess elven blood, and that judging an elven's age by appearance was unreliable. Thank you, Caitlin, Ino thanked her, looking at the exquisite food in her hands. It's nothing. I'm the one to thank. Caitlin shook her head and sighed softly. If it weren't for you today, Celia might be fine, but I might have died. Maybe this is fate. Ino whispered, would you mind sitting down and talking to me for a moment? Honestly, as you can probably tell, this is my first time at the Elven Fortress. Yes, actually, there's nothing special here. Despite this, Caitlin sat down and gently placed the food on the table. Yet, this casual gesture caught Ino's gaze. You? Did I do something wrong? Caitlin asked, feeling the sharp, pointed gaze. Haha, no, it's just that your ring is very special. Seeing the girl a little nervous, Ino's expression also relaxed. Ring? Caitlin looked down at the index finger of her left hand. There was a ring woven from straw. Although she didn't find anything wrong, she still introduced it in detail. I found this when I was a child playing in the ruins of the back alley of Huttonmer. At that time, I just thought it was very delicate, so I have been wearing it ever since. As she spoke, Caitlin raised her hand to take off the ring. No. Put it back. Ino grabbed the other's hand, and after realizing the impoliteness, he quickly let go. Sorry, I meant that you put your hands in the light. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.